Johnny Trejo. I want you guys to check out my favorite show, Experimentally Ill.
I remember things. It's more than just void, darkness, unconsciousness. The mind does work. There are images, patterns, things to recollect. It's not just the long, deep sleep that comes when the fear has left. The cold is felt, the slipping away of feeling is noted and then succumbed to. The mind functions. Time is distorted, jumbled, telescoped, accordion, but there is a sense of time even so. And I remember things. I remember the way it began. I remember the way it was and it was and it was and it was in the beginning.
Daddy, I think he's lost his mind. He's never been like this before. Tonight he was almost raving.
What did you say?
Oh, crazy things, that he's some kind of a spaceman and that they're taking over the Earth and that we're all going to die.
They told me to keep in mind the scientific.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your pal Michael O'Toole here on the Experimentally Ill podcast. It's episode 119 for May 18th, 2025. And of course, you can check us out on experimentally'ill.com and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much wherever you get podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube now, youtube.com/experimentally'ill. There's actually a bunch of podcasts that have been ported over to there that you can listen to. And of course, you can check out the Experimentally Ill, the movie series over there on YouTube. We have 10 editions of those things, which are pretty fun. I think we've been debuting them at the Boston Open Screen, and you can also check them out at Open Screen LA now. And I got a guest here, man. I got the man, Hartley Pleshaw. You'll know him from WCAP AM 980 on the radio in Lowell, Massachusetts. And like I said, if you've been checking out the Experimentally Ill, the movie series, you'll know him as a great orator, covered several topics. And we're going to check in with Hartley. How's it going?
Michael, once again, it is an honor and a privilege to be in front of one of your cameras and speaking to one of your microphones.
That's right. I heard you're a fan of anything that has to do with cameras or microphones.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It also helps if I get paid to do that. But,
we're working on that.
It's just one of these things that I do.
Right. We also know you as, I always thought you were a great writer. I always see your stuff like up online on Facebook and stuff, but I also know you wrote for the kind of New England film and video magazine called Imagine Magazine too.
Yes, well, I had the great privilege of writing for that magazine beginning in 2007. That was a long time ago, and I established a very good relationship with the editor and publisher of that publication, which was also online at the end of its existence. I think it's at the end of its existence. Carol Patton, who I'm very sad to say passed away a few months ago, and she was, I think she was the mainstay of supporting film and video and creative arts production in New England, particularly in Massachusetts. And whenever there was a film coming up, whenever there was a big production, wherever there were people doing creative things, whether it was acting, whether it was writing, whether it was producing, directing, she would have me interview such people or find out about such events. And it was a great privilege to meet and get to know all those great people. And I do hope that you and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago. We don't know what the future of Imagine Magazine is, but I do hope that in Carol's memory, because she devoted so much of her life to it. I mean, I can't think of anyone who dedicated themselves more to film and video and creative work in Massachusetts than Carol Patton did. And I hope somehow, some way, Imagine Magazine will be carried on in her memory, and that would be the greatest tribute we could pay to Carol, who is, such an amazing person. It was great to know her. I'm so sorry she's left us, and it was a great privilege to write for that magazine.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think Imagine Magazine. I don't know. The last few years, I think it might have just been online, right? Like
yes,
a lot
I
of
think
stuff.
it was. It used to be a very glossy, very attractive magazine. You'd find it in theaters all over, movie theaters, live performance spaces. It was really, there were a lot of so-called giveaway papers in those places, but Imagine was really glossy, great photography in color. Just the feel of the magazine was a great experience, and Carol dedicated. I can't put this more strongly than this. She dedicated her life to that magazine and what it stood for. There would be no tax credit for film in Massachusetts if it wasn't for Carol Patton. A lot of people like to take credit for that and for the upsurge in film production in Massachusetts, but believe me, no one was more responsible for that than Carol was. I wish people would give her more notice for that, because she was the person who really kept it going and helped make it happen and helped keep it going, because there were a lot of people who wanted to get rid of it. A lot of politicians wanted to get rid of it. There were all kinds of negative articles written about it. There was some kind of giveaway to Hollywood. And Carol made the point that it wasn't just Hollywood people who came in and made films and then left. Those productions stimulated a lot of ancillary industries and businesses, from food catering to flower arranging to carpentry work to whatever it was you want to name that goes into making films. It was Massachusetts people who benefited from those things. So. God bless Carol, and it's just a shame we've lost her.
Sure. Yeah, we, I think the last time I remember I was a guest on one of your radio shows. We were doing a tribute to the great filmmaker Mick Cusimano, who we also lost. We're really starting out on a positive note here.
Well,
all these
I just want to say,
champions.
one of the things I'm so grateful to Carol for is that's how I met Mick, and that's how I met you.
Yeah.
And Lawrence Hawley and a lot of other people.
Network,
and Gosha, the imagined family, the Mick Cusimano network empire, all of these amazingly creative people right in this area, and Imagine Magazine was right at the kind of the hot center of it all. And but Mick, what can you say about Mick? He was such an incredible person, incredible talent, one of the nicest human beings I've ever known, and I miss him terribly as well. Good people should not be allowed to die. It should be illegal for good people to die, but.
That's right. Well, and then our buddy Robert Lee also passed away pretty suddenly. Did
that was
follow his stuff too? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a terrible loss as well. And Dawn Rieger, who was a great friend of all of us, and particularly Mick. She was in so many of Mick's films, and she was a dynamite performer and a great person. And we lost her a few years ago. So. Oh, it's tough, but we try to carry on. People like you and Lawrence and the rest of the creative community.
That's right.
People like Gosha, we carry on, and we hope to keep carrying on.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk about it's kind of expanding the network out and kind of keeping that ethos alive. Creating narrative filmmaking or documentary or creative writing and all kinds of stuff.
Of course, Boston and New England, particularly the Boston area, Cambridge, we've always had that kind of creativity and great people doing this kind of work. And of course, these days it's getting a little harder to do that kind of work for political reasons and others, which I won't go into it.
Which we can usually hear that content on, I think, your weekly radio show.
Yes,
times, right?
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, I have since March of 2015, It goes back a long time, and now it's almost like, 10 and a quarter years. I've had this program on WCAP in Lowell, WCAP AM 980 in Lowell. It's one of the last of the old-time AM English language, locally owned and oriented radio stations. I've had this program on Saturdays called Active Radio, which is a general interest talk show. And people ask me what it's about, and I tell them it's about whoever shows up as my guest or whoever wants to come on as my guest.
Right.
We'll talk about politics, but most of the political people, the writers and journalists, for some reason they're not beating down my door to it. With them it works like this. They have a book come out, and
Right.
you contact them, and their people will tell me, he or she is way too busy right now. Call us back in 6 months. And
Do you have a long list? Because I remember seeing
Right.
you online trying to. I give you credit because they always talk about all this show business stuff. You have to get really comfortable
Right.
with rejection.
Right.
And I know you could tell us you've had a long line of luminaries on your
yes.
show, including myself,
Well-
from time to time.
well, I will
But
say-
tell us about
yeah.
some of those rejection letters too.
Well, mainly emails, not formal letters. But like I said, you'll contact him and say, he's too busy right now. Call us back in 6 months. Call back in 6 months. Oh, he has another book coming out in a few months. Call us back then when he's more in the mood. Call them back then, and they say, "Oh, sorry, we're too busy." That kind of thing. I don't want to mention names, but it's like the people who are fairly well known nationally. But I will say this: when it comes to other things, when it comes to music, when it comes to film, when it comes to television. When it comes to the creative people, not just locally, people like you and Mick Cusimano, great people, and Carol Patton and all those other wonderful people I've talked to through the years, but legendary people. In fact, the past 2 weeks on my that radio show and the other program I have on WCAP, I now do the afternoon drive time show from 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Mondays through Thursdays. In fact, I came here from a concert I guess you could say a multimedia show, a concert and storytelling session from Peter Asher. And I had Peter on my radio show a week ago Saturday. I've had him on several times in the past. Peter Asher, for those who may be younger than I am, and that would include most of the world right now, he was the Peter of Peter and Gordon. He was a member of the British invasion that hit this country in 1964. And he and his partner, Gordon Waller, had all kinds of hit records. He was close friends with the Beatles. His sister, the actress Jane Asher, was Paul McCartney's girlfriend throughout most of the Beatle years. So Paul actually lived in his house in London for a lot of times, and that's where a lot of the great Beatles songs were written, up in in Paul's apartment in the Asher household. And then after all that, a few years later, Peter became probably one of the most legendary producers of music in pop music history. He actually discovered James Taylor. He produced his albums. He produced Linda Ronstadt's albums, and now he's working on an album with Barbra Streisand that's going to feature a number of prominent legends like Barbra, including Bob Dylan. So this guy, and he came on. I don't know how old he is now. He looks a little different now than he did in '64, but then so do we all. But he came on. He gave a great, had a band behind him. He gave a great musical performance and told a lot of those stories about all the people he's known and all the people he's worked with. So I was very lucky to have him on my show. And then last week on my afternoon show, I interviewed Jimmy Webb. Jimmy Webb is one of the, I would put him up there with George Gershwin or Irving Berlin, one of the great composers of the Great American Songbook. He emerged in the mid and late '60s, about the same time people like other great songwriters like Laura Nyro and Randy Newman and Harry Nilsson emerged. And it was like every 2 weeks I listened to Top 40 radio back then, before I became more sophisticated and started listening to FM underground radio.
That's right.
It seemed like every 2 weeks there would be a new hit song from Jimmy Webb, whether it was Up, Up and Away by the Fifth Dimension, or Galveston by Glenn Campbell, or his magnum opus, MacArthur Park by Richard Harris, which later became a big hit for Boston's own Donna Summer. And so I had a great interview with Jimmy. I saw him in concert a couple of nights ago. He was performing at the City Winery in Boston, and Basher was performing at the Regent Theater in Arlington. Great performance spaces. Boston is so lucky to have these or the Boston area is so lucky to have these great performance places. And it was just amazing talking and getting to know these people who were legends when I was a little kid. And all these decades later, they're still at it. Now I know them personally and interview them. It's just an incredible honor to talk to people like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, have you always gravitated towards, you said cameras, microphones?
Yeah, kind of.
You can jump back and talk. I know you were talking about, we know, I think you went to Emerson, right? Way back.
Yeah, well, I originally, my first college was Merrimack College in North Andover, a very small Catholic school. I'm not Catholic, but they let me in, so I went.
You just put in a lot of prayers.
Yeah, well, actually, no. Actually, there were some required religion courses, but not too many. And mainly they dealt with history, which I've always loved. I love studying history. Back then, I thought of in terms of someday becoming a lawyer.
I can see that, too. I can see you up in the...
Thank you.
You should play a lawyer in a movie.
Well, it's probably the closest thing I'll ever get to a law degree.
Right.
But actually, after I graduated from Merrimack in the late 70s, I really wasn't qualified to do anything, so I thought it would be a good training ground for a possible legal career if I went to work. A friend of mine back in the days of the old CETA program, which now I'm really showing my age. He got me a job as a court officer in the district court in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Not to be confused with Lawrence Hawley.
That's right. Co-producer of the experimentally movie series.
Right. And so what I did was I thought I would be, helping the judges with their caseload or something like that. Basically, it was just a glorified security guard job. And everyone treated me horribly, me and my colleagues horribly, except the prisoners. They treated us with more respect than anyone. We were the ones who got them their lunch, so they liked us.
Yeah.
Everyone else, the cops, the lawyers, the clerks, everyone else treated us like we were, peons. And I remember thinking, if this is what making a living in a courtroom is like, I want no part of it. So I kind of had a conversation with myself, and I thought, well, what do I really like? What do I really enjoy doing? And I realized that most of my spare time I was reading about film. I was reading about, back in the 70s, people like Spielberg and Lucas and Coppola and Scorsese and people like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Meryl Streep. And I'm thinking to myself, that turns me on. That sounds like fun stuff. So I decided I'd try to have a go at filmmaking. So I applied, and of course I had no academic or professional background in filmmaking. And I don't know why they did it, but for some reason Emerson took me in as part of their first graduate program in mass communications. And we all entered in September of 1980. And I'll tell you how long ago that was. That was when Emerson's campus was still in the old townhouses in Back Bay along Berkeley and Beacon Streets. I remember visiting there for the first time, looking for the Emerson campus, and eventually I realized there was no Emerson campus. Emerson College was in all those buildings. So back then, again, we're talking 1980. I took film courses. I took a course in television production, and the course in TV production. The only equipment they had back then This was way before home video, way before the stuff we're dealing with now. The only people who had that kind of equipment, video, TV cameras and video editing equipment, were either the three TV networks at the time and local TV stations. So there was no mass production in those in those things. So Emerson, which is recognized as the finest communication school in the country, or one of them, right up there with NYU or UCLA or some of the others.
Right, where, yeah, like you say, right here in
right in Boston.
Massachusetts. Yeah.
They had to get like hand-me-downs from the networks and the local stations. You could still see the corporate logos from people like NBC or WBZ and whatever. And they tried to keep them in good shape, but obviously after many years, they were kind of worn out. In fact, the first video tape editing setup we had, it was pure analog. They warned us to put it in error factor of from 5 to 10 seconds as to where your edit was where you hoped your edit would be.
Right, you had to just kind of guess where
right. So, and I don't mean to say this to put Emerson down, because at least they were doing these things. Very few colleges and universities were doing these things. And the film program was like, it was all celluloid, and the old Steenbeck machines where actually had to literally cut and paste film, cut it with scissors and paste it with I don't know, Scotch tape or whatever it was we used there that back then. And of course, all the great filmmakers use that equipment anyway. So I'm not putting down Emerson, but looking back, that was, oh God, close to half a century ago, and I did somehow I wound up with a master's degree in mass communications. Although I have to say my experience at Emerson was kind of a mixed bag. There were some great teachers there, great people. The atmosphere there was incredibly creative. But there was also one of my film instructors told me I was just wasting my money and his time by taking these classes. He told me, you're not going to succeed in film. You're not even going to succeed in television. You don't have it. Real charmer, this guy.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And where is he now?
I don't know, but I haven't heard about him winning any Oscars or Emmys lately himself. Right. So I just, I hope he's probably pumping gas in Dorchester somewhere. Anyway, but yes, I did go to Emerson. I did get a degree, and once again, as soon as I got my degree, there was a little matter of trying to make a living. Actually, even before I got my degree from Emerson, I was working in local cable TV, local community access or local origination television. Again, this was the early 80s, early to mid 80s, and that kind of thing was just starting. The first one I worked in was in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I didn't get along particularly well with my boss, so I then worked at the one in Lawrence, Massachusetts, my hometown, by the way. And of course, in those days, the local access operations were run and controlled by the cable companies themselves. Back then, there were a good number of local, there were national companies, but they had these local franchises like Continental Cablevision, and the one I worked for in Lowell was Colony Communications, which was owned by the Providence Journal Bulletin newspaper. The great takeover by people like Comcast, and now we have this merger between, I think, what is it? Anyway, two other big cable companies have just merged. So basically now they're like one or two corporations that run the whole local cable business.
Right, the Illuminati, basically.
Right. But of course, they weren't making any money out of it. They had to agree to do these things and hire people like me to get their franchises as soon as possible. Most of these companies encouraged local nonprofit access corporations to come into existence and take it off their hands, take people like me off their hands. And so, I went on to work for some other cable access corporations. I work for one now in the town of Townsend where I live. But that was That and Imagine Magazine, those are that was as close as I ever got to Hollywood. I'm still trying, though.
Yeah, well, we got to talk about, I mean, over the past, I think since about 2023, I've been, and then also with the help, with the encouragement of, you mentioned Lawrence Hawley, who's now, was, for people who don't know, was here in the Boston area and then went out to California like at least a decade ago now. But yeah, just he and I working together, and yeah, I had worked with our friend Mick Cusimano on some films, and then I remember I think you were in a few of those, and seeing you, and and I know Lawrence had also in the early 2000s was working at some community television stations. And I was helping him out, and he knew you from some of those interactions too.
Yeah, well, that was when he was, and maybe you were there too, in Stoneham, Massachusetts.
Yeah,
I think.
that was when he.
Yeah, Lawrence is a great guy. It was always great working with him, and yes, Mick Cusimano desperately tried to make a star out of me, and it was great working with him. And I think one of his films, I'm trying to remember, it was was it the Little Red Riding Hood one? Where I tried to sell Little Red Riding Hood a lion or something like that, and then there was the one where Lawrence turned into an ape, and he actually got him dressed up in an ape suit, and he was the victim of a mad scientist or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But Mick was so incredibly creative, and as an artist, a literal artist, he of course was a great visual artist. He was the official cartoonist of Imagine Magazine.
That's right. He had his own strip,
and he had his little cubbyhole of an apartment in Cambridge. But he turned it into his creative space. He would actually put something together there where he could edit his productions and create this animation that he made. And he was an incredible guy, and I'll always be grateful that I knew him, because he was such a he was not only very creative, he was a very nice man. And always easy to get along with, and it was just a joy working for him. I still miss those Sunday afternoons when we would gather in, what was the... Anyway, it was
Cambridge
on,
or
Cambridge, down the lower end of Mass Ave, and where the fire station was, and that little park there, not really a park, but it was like a little green space, and he turned it into his studio. And I would go there, Gosha would go there, and we would act out scenes from his films. It was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and he based a lot of movies around his poetry, and lots of themes that I come to realize he kind of been working through, through the decades, really. Right. Because he had his own magazine too. You talk about like underground stuff. I'm thinking about underground publishing. Like he did, I think it was Underground Surrealist magazine, and then when he had the group of people called Squawk, who did the Squawk Coffee House. Then they also had Squawk Magazine. So
Squawk Coffee House in Cambridge.
That was kind of all that
Harvard Square,
all that counterculture stuff.
Yeah, well, Mick was a dedicated bohemian. He was very much into the beatniks, into the hippies, into any alternative creative voice. I think that's why so many people were attracted to him and wanted to work with him, because he let people like that express themselves. Yeah. And he couldn't pay them anything, and it was it was kind of a Spartan situation. But but all Mick was interested in was getting creative people to let their creative juices flow and to run wild, and people very much like himself, only he was a little more talented than the rest of us, because he actually was able to put this stuff together, edit it, create it, draw it, and he was the he was the
ringleader, kind of
ringleader. He was the great magnet that drew all these people around him, and I will always be grateful to him that he let me in his little circle, because it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
So I think it was around maybe 2010 that Lawrence and I kind of got pulled into the Mick Cusimano orbit,
right?
Because Lawrence was over at the Brookline Access television station, and I was there, and then Mick would come in to get his cartoon screened on the channel. And then I think we were part of that, the movie Monkey Do, Monkey Don't. Like you said, where
Yes,
Lawrence was the ape.
that was the one, yeah.
Yeah. So I knew you from there. And then Lawrence and I had been doing some different productions. I made some movies with my friend John Hartman, who does Real Groovy Films, and different people that I knew from when we did our film festival that was called Experimentally Ill. And then we did the Experimentally Ill podcast for several years. And then like around 2023, I started to get the itch again to make more of my own visual stuff. And I think it was John Hartman who reintroduced me to the Boston Open Screen at the Coolidge Corner Theater. And I think originally Mick Cusimano had let us know about Boston Open Screen. It was sort of like an open mic night for local filmmakers. If you have something that's 10 minutes or less, you can get it screened in a full theater at the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, Mass. Great historic Art Deco theater. So, so that combination plus getting back into public access at Cambridge Community Television, where our filmmaker friend Dio Polanski, who we also made some stuff with, he used to go there to, produce things. I know Cusimano also used to do stuff there. So I went back there, and then upon the recommendation of one Lawrence Hawley, he said, you got to get this Hartley Pleshaw guy to get involved. And the rest is history,
Lawrence is a great guy, and I'll always be grateful to him for linking me up with you. But you mentioned the Coolidge Corner. I'd like to mention someone else who, again, sadly, is no longer with us. But through Carol Patton and through Imagine Magazine, I got to know David Kleiler.
I think I heard of him because there's an award named after him at the Boston Underground Film Festival.
He was a great organizer of film festivals, several, and it was his leadership you mentioned the Coolidge Corner. It was his leadership that saved the Coolidge Corner. He was at the forefront of its effort to restore it to its previous glory, and it's hard to imagine there not being a Coolidge Corner cinema in Coolidge Corner in Brookline, but it came very close to going out of business and being either torn down or turned into some god awful national chain business or whatever it was they did to the great old theaters. But David saved it, and David, again, was a great guy. I interviewed him many times and got to know him, and would attend festivals with him. Wonderful man. I'm so sorry we lost him, but if you love the Coolidge Corner cinema, you should always be grateful to David Kleiler. He saved it.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think that's one of those. The local institutions always seem to be somehow in jeopardy, and somehow the Brattle is still standing.
Yeah, well, the Brattle, and I just, as I mentioned earlier, I just came from the Regent Theater in Arlington, Massachusetts, where I saw Peter Asher perform, and that was another great it goes back to vaudeville days. 1913 is when it first opened, and like the Coolidge Corner, and I believe the Brattle as well, it was originally a vaudeville house. And then movies came in, and it became a great movie house. And these were very well designed and beautifully apportioned places. And so many of them after World War II got torn down. I mentioned Lawrence, Massachusetts. There used to be a neighborhood right on Broadway in Lawrence, right next to downtown, called Theater Row. There would be the old Warner Theater. There would be, several of the great old movie theaters. And in the name of the badly misnamed urban renewal, they all got torn down in the 60s. And I don't know what replaced them, vacant lots, basically. But it was people like David Kleiler at the Coolidge Corner and my friend Leland Stein at the Regent Theater in Arlington that fought to prevent these places from being taken over or being priced out of existence by real estate speculators or whatever it was. And now the Coolidge Corner and the Regent and the Brattle, they're 100 or so years after they came into being, they're back to being what they started as. Great movie houses, great live performance venues. I know that the Regent, they have all kinds of things going on there. They have comedians, they have live music concerts. They have multimedia presentations like what I saw today with Peter Asher. One thing they were able to do is they found an old video of Peter's former partner, Gordon Waller, who sadly has passed on, singing solo one of their old great hits. And so they showed that, and they played, the audio of him singing, of Gordon singing, and Peter was there live singing his part. So it was like a Peter and Gordon reunion.
Yeah.
And that kind of audio visual thing, is a big part of what the Regent is all about. And my good friend, Beatle Maniac #1, Chachi Loprette, has practically made that his second home. Every 2 months or so, he does something about the Beatles, and takes full use of that facility, showing great film clips or video clips of the Beatles, and playing their music through the sound system there. And he does his presentations on stage. It's just a wonderful place. So my eternal gratitude to David Kleiler and Leland Stein and these people who fought to keep these places alive, and not just as artifacts, but as vibrant present day production performance places. So we should be very grateful that there are still some places like that in Boston, and people like that in the Boston area that have done that.
Yeah, like creating communities around media and
Yes.
everything. But I wanted to talk about. I mean, we know you've acted in the Mick Cusimano productions and stuff,
yes.
but yeah, like thanks for being a part of the Experimentally Ill productions.
Anything I can do for you guys, Michael, I'd love to do them. I just wish I was more available. So many people now have claims on my time that of course, I live way out in the sticks. I live way out in what I call Greater Albany, Townsend, Mass. Nothing against Townsend. They're great people. They just elected me to a town board. I didn't even run for it.
That's right.
So they're great people, but,
You're a folk hero,
I wish I was more available, closer to the core of all this. Even when I was a young kid growing up in Methuen, which is right on the New Hampshire line, I would view Boston with
stars in your eyes.
Yeah, as this awesome, kind of New England Disneyland, where all the TV shows were from, and all the great concerts were being performed, and all the great radio stations and radio personalities came from. So. I still kind of look at Boston that way, but now it's people like you. So it's like the old days are still around in many ways.
Well, we made some good use of your time. I think like that. I think it was like last summer, or maybe a couple of summers ago. We learned of your talents as a monologuist, as an orator.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's very kind of you, and that's very, said so many nice things about that through the years, or whenever it was we did it.
Yeah.
And all I can say is, I had no script. You said say something, and I said it. And I don't know what I said. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't write it, but it worked. So I guess that's
a little sleight of the hand, a little editing, and let's set it to some music. Give it an interesting background.
Well, I guess that's a sign I should not write anything down anymore. Just whatever comes into my head, just say it and do it, and that's the best way to handle it. Yes.
Yeah. So you've been, I think, kind of a exciting part of the sort of each. For those who don't know, I mean, the experimental movies became like 10 minutes at a clip, fitting into the Boston Open Screen show, and that deadline really pushed us to create something. But for those familiar with MTV's Liquid Television back in the day, or USA Night Flight, kind of this variety format. So we cut to your segment, and you're always giving us kind of a unique take on one particular subject. Like we had 1980s technology in mind, and then we kind of focused on VHS nostalgia.
Right.
And what else? We had artificial intelligence. That's a hot topic.
Oh, yes.
So that's a popular one. And I think it's been pretty fun to come out to Boston Open Screen, and we've been getting recognized for our efforts. So it's been really fun to pull people together again.
It's a lot of fun for me personally. Thank you again for your kind words. I deeply appreciate it. And I think that, I'm getting on in years, as anyone watching this can tell. But it's like, the 80s were to you people, you kids, Michael, what the 60s were to me. I mean, your Beatles and your Bob Dylan were, what was it? Well, of course, there was Madonna, there was Michael Jackson, but like you said, there were also people like Max Headroom, and they were doing some pretty funky stuff on MTV back then. Nothing like what they would do today, but back then in the dawn of the music video era, you could do some pretty crazy creative stuff, with one exception. I remember, I don't know if you know about Captain Beefheart. He was really out there when it was dangerous to be out there. Goes back to the 60s. He grew up with Frank Zappa. They were boyhood friends, and like Frank Zappa, he went out of his way to be a little bit on the eccentric side, creatively, of course. I love Frank Zappa. He's one of my heroes. And back when MTV was first starting, Captain Beefheart made his own music video from one of his songs. It was called "Ice Cream for Crow." And if you ever get a chance to watch it, please do. It's on YouTube. It's just I can't even describe it. It's beyond anything. And he created it, and he put it together, and he offered it to MTV, and they rejected it, as he said once, because it was too weird. They thought it was too weird. So ever since then, I'm thinking to myself, MTV did some great things, but it's the people who do the weird stuff that really stand out in my mind. So anything I can do to advance the cause of weirdness, I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think you are a pivotal part, I think, really. And also lending some credibility, I think, because you have that gravitas, where even if you don't immediately know what you're talking about, you convince us that you do know.
Yeah, well, there's a profession for people like that. It's called politics. But,
right. Is that next for you? Are you going to announce it here on the show?
Yeah. Well, no. I was just. Two people wrote my name in Townsend, Mass, for the planning board, which was 2 more votes than I think the next person got. So basically, I got a call one day from the town clerk's office, and they said, "Guess what? You've just been elected to something." And I said, "Really? I didn't even run for it." And they said, No, they wrote your name in. And so I'd like to thank those 2 people who did, and I won by a landslide. I just hope that, one of you still will be able to vote. And that'll keep because if one of you dies or moves away, I will have lost 50% of my support. So, but anyway.
I was looking forward to you running a campaign, like our friend Vermin Supreme runs for president with a boot on his head, or maybe Hunter S. Thompson's campaign.
Oh, Hunter Thompson, yes. Well, he was one of my boyhood literary heroes. And try to imagine the position I was in back when I was, 14, 15 years old. I was in first, what we then called junior high. Now it's called middle school, and then high school. And I was like the ultimate outcast, the ultimate loner, the ultimate loser. I wasn't just the straight kids who wanted nothing to do with me. The so-called hip kids wanted nothing to do with me either. And
those are the formative years that brought us to where we are.
Yeah, well, of course, if adolescence, I would never. Frank Sinatra once said if he had to be 14 years old again, he'd slit his wrists. That's pretty much my attitude toward adolescence. But I was a big reader of Rolling Stone, and I was a big reader of Thompson, and he was one of my heroes. I mean, there was. You read a book like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas today, as amazing as it still is. Imagine what happened when it came out back in 1971,
right, where there wasn't as much of a reference for that.
And now I see, looking back, that Hunter Thompson was, basically continuing a great American literary tradition. He was like the next generation of like the Jack Kerouac movement or the beat poetry movement. Very much, he was the the next link in that chain. And of course, Jack Kerouac is a native of Lowell, Massachusetts. I want to add that. He grew up in a town 10 miles upriver from where I grew up. And it's funny about Jack Kerouac. When he was alive in his declining years, he was not exactly a hero in Lowell. He was like a frequent occupant of the the drunk tank at the city jail. Yeah, he had a kind of a rough time toward the end. Now that he passed on in 1969, and ever since then, he's become a great tourist attraction in Lowell. There's a Jack Kerouac Park. I did a thing on the radio last week about the new Jack Kerouac Center that's being built or being put together. And there, you drive through Lowell, and there'll be pictures of Jack Kerouac on the lampposts of the street lights. Lowell loves him now. Too bad he didn't feel more of that love when he was alive. But Hunter Thompson, who I understand also had a bit of a attraction to certain substances.
So they say.
Right. Carried on that tradition and went to places no one else would go. He was certainly one of my heroes.
Yeah, I think there was a breakdown of, he must have had like a journal of, when he would get up,
Right.
6 o'clock at night, whatever, and start
right. Well,
the recipe for all the drinks he would have and the substances, mescaline and whatever.
Yeah. Well, toward the end, I guess, of course, he killed himself. He committed suicide. Probably, I heard that, I've read some books about that part of his life toward the end, and I guess he had a chronic back problem and other medical problems. And I was thinking to myself as I was reading this, I said, the poor guy probably built up a resistance to every pain-killing drug that was ever invented.
That's the only way.
I mean, he was eating that stuff like candy. Mescaline like they were M&Ms, and so. God bless him. He was an amazing guy. Again, I'm sorry things didn't end too happily for him, but he's a true legend, no question about that.
Yeah. Well, in terms of legend Hartley, there's in our own personal myths, and in the Hartley myth, I would be remiss if I finally get you here. We need, in your back catalog and your pursuits of show business, intentional, unintentional. I hear about. Could you tell us about this Hartley Cribs video? Would you mind talking about that?
Oh yeah. Well,
inspired by MTV Cribs, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what happened was back. How long ago was it? It was the turn of the century, around 1999 or 2000.
During the reality show craze, I think.
A close friend of mine, a very creative guy himself, a wonderful human being, Mike Morgan, he's still on the radio now. He great radio producer, great on-air talent, who's always tried to help me in every way possible, encourage. Always tries to encourage me to do things and do things in front of a camera or in front of a microphone.
Yeah.
And so I just moved next door to this old ramshackle building in Pepperell, Massachusetts, which was not really a apartment building. It was kind of like an old house that had fallen into disrepair, but a couple of the spaces in it had been renovated. So he lived next door to me. He invited me to, when he found out the place next door was empty, he invited me to move in, which I did. And that's when he started following me around with a camera and suggested we make a video, and like you say, the whole reality TV thing was just starting. So he wanted me to make my own version of MTV Cribs. And there really wasn't much to show. My apartment was which
was famous for, I think, showing celebrities living in the lap of luxury, I think.
Right. Well, I was not living in the lap of luxury. I was living in my place. Someone once asked me what my apartment was like. I said, try to imagine a library that vomits and has chronic diarrhea at the same time. That's pretty much how it was. And so I got to say this for myself. I'm a very literary person. I'm not very neat, but I am literary.
Yeah.
What's her name? Marie Kondo, if she ever saw one of my places, she'd hang herself. But anyway, yeah, Mike made the video, and he also showed me showing off my my minivan that I drove at the time. And I this was like before YouTube, but eventually somehow, I don't know if Mike put it up on YouTube, but somebody put it on YouTube. So anyway, fast forward 25 years. I was doing the morning radio shift at WCAP late last fall and early last winter. And that time of day was like 5, 6 in the morning. You get some, shall we say, interesting people listening to the radio at that hour. And there was this guy who called.
Is your show like typically a call-in show?
Well, people can call in. Yeah. It's more of a me babbling away for 3 hours. But anyway, this guy called in, and he kept calling in every day at about the same time. I won't mention his name or the town he was from, but people of my age will remember the great writer Truman Capote, who also had some adventures with substances and so forth. But a great writer, wrote some great books like Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood. Anyway, this guy who kept calling me sounded exactly like Truman Capote. He had that high-pitched voice and sounded like that. And one day he called me. He said, "I saw you in that video in your apartment." And I said, "What was that?" "Yes, it was you showing off your apartment and showing off your minivan. I saw it." And I went after that interesting encounter on the radio. I went back to Mike and I said, "Mike, I don't remember this." And he said, "Oh yeah, I remember back at the old place in Pepperell. I shot you.
So you didn't even remember it.
I didn't even remember it.
Wow.
And yet this guy, I don't know what he does, with his life, and I don't know. I would hesitate to speculate as to his state of mind, but for some reason, this guy ferreted out my MTV Cribs video from a quarter century before, and like every day at the same time he'd call and he said, "Yes, I remember that. I just watched it again." And I said, "Oh God." Anyway, that's my little take on that. Fame does come with a price, folks.
I think it was supposed to be like an audition for, at the time there was the popular show, was it Queer Eye for the Straight Guy? It was
there
supposed
was
to be like
that
a
show
makeover
going on, and back then when reality TV was just starting, they would actually some of these shows would actually solicit people to send in videos and whatever. And Mike, God bless Mike, he thought I had potential in that regard, so he made this video. It got up on YouTube, and it didn't make a star out of me, but I can say I have at least one follower. Maybe I kind of wish you wouldn't follow me, but hey, that's the way it goes.
Is it like blackmail material now,
no,
or
no,
it's
I
looked
never
back
had
at
that.
lovingly? Or...
I've had very little of such fun in my life that I've yet to make a sex video.
Still time.
Well, yes, I always hope that one of these days. Anyway, but no, this was not salacious. It was just.
I think you were showing us your diet of Cheese Whiz and Ritz crackers. That was one of those.
Yeah, that was another one. Yeah. Well, we went around the apartment. I opened up the cupboard door and I showed people. Mike encouraged me to do this. He said, show us what you eat. And I said, Ritz crackers and cheese and peanut butter and whatever else was in the cupboard. My very modest Epicurean tastes.
Right.
But Mike loved it. He said, "Hey, this is great, and we can do something with this." So, But anyway, if any of you big time producers are watching this and think you can make me into a star with my my domestic videos, I'll call them. Hey, I'm here. I'm yours anytime you want me.
Right. We'll have to, there's an update in the future of Hartley Cribs, which I think since then it has come out that even the true MTV Cribs was sort of all Doctor. These
Oh,
celebrities
yeah.
would rent out,
Yeah.
you know, places or rent nicer cars
Right.
just for the cameras.
Right,
Who
and-
would have thought?
And I'm sure that, dare I say, that Andy Cohen's Real Housewives franchise might be a little embellished. I mean, they all feature these women. Eventually, at some point in the show, they start throwing things at each other.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so anyway, but hey, if it makes for good television, it's okay with me.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And I mean, any other public access experiences? Just that ethos of doing it
Well,
yourself.
nothing as outrageous as that. Back when I was at Lowell Cable TV, I did a series. I'm very proud of the series I did with the Merrimack Repertory Theater. What happened was it was an up and coming repertory theater that had some great people come through Lowell. Again, another great old performance space that was slated for the wrecking ball, but they restored it, and it helped to inspire one of the great New England theatrical repertory companies, the MRT. And I just started working for Lowell Cable, and I was thinking to myself, it would be great if we could make a TV show with those guys. I mean, we wouldn't be able to record their plays because that's against Actors' Equity rules. I wasn't talking about that. But when a new play came in town, I thought, well, it'd be great if we could interview the actors or the director or whomever was behind it, and we could cut in, scenes from the rehearsals so that would illustrate what they were. They allowed us to film, Actors' Equity rules allowed us to film 3 minutes of a play or a rehearsal. Basically
That's
back then they had, local film critics and theater critics on TV, and they would show little clips of it. So I put that show together.
But you weren't allowed to do beginning to end of.
No. But that wasn't really what I was interested in. What I was interested in was finding out the creative process behind the scenes, and it went very well. And it was very very well achieved, very acclaimed. Everyone loved it, and I kept doing it right up until the time I was fired. But it's interesting because I noticed I was channel scrolling on TV a few weeks ago, and I came across on one of the PBS stations. Apparently, one of the PBS station in the New York area, one of them anyway, does a show very similar to the one I conceived in Lowell, and I watched it for a couple of minutes, and I was thinking to myself, gee, where do they get the idea for this?
So was this a series or just
Oh
a
yeah, it was a
one-off
series.
show that you did?
Every month we did whenever a new play came into town,
Yeah.
or even other people who came in through Lowell and performed. I remember I did a great show with again, sadly, the late Shay Duffin, the great Irish actor. He did his one-man show about Brendan Behan, another great poetic talent who probably should have laid off the joy juice. He drank himself to death when he was 35 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he came in and he did his one-man show. He was wonderful to talk to. I was talking about Lowell and Jack Kerouac a little while ago, and I didn't know too much about Brendan Behan, so I read up on him, and I found it kind of interesting that Brendan Behan was from Ireland, he was from Dublin. They basically ran him out of town. And then yet when he died, 1 million people showed up for his funeral.
Of course.
And I asked Shay about that, and he said, "Oh, that's the Irish for you. They love you when you're dead.
Yeah.
When you're dead, you're down with them, and they love you.
You're down with them.
Yeah. So okay, yeah, that was fun. That was a nice revelation. Yes.
Morbid humor.
Yes.
So what was the name of your series you did?
It was called Lowell Playhouse, and it was a lot of fun. It was very interesting, and it didn't keep me from getting fired. But it was,
So did anyone take the reins of that show then, or did it essentially end the show?
I think when they got rid of me, they wanted to. It was like being a non-person in the old Soviet Union. They wanted to expunge any evidence that I had ever lived.
Right.
So hey, fine. I mean, I've since adopted the attitude if they don't want me, I don't want them. So, but
Yeah.
But I worked with some great people, some very creative people, and a lot of, they're still friends of mine today. Some of the people I worked with then. So it was a that part of it was an enjoyable experience. Other parts of it weren't so much fun.
And which was that? Was it the Lowell?
Well, back then, yeah. Well, now of course Lowell has a very vibrant public access operation similar to the one Cambridge has. Lowell Telecommunications Corporation, I think it's called. But back then, it was part of what was known as Lowell Cable Television, and that was owned by Colony Communications, which had the cable franchise, and they were owned by the Providence Journal Bulletin newspaper in Rhode Island. So it was, much more of a corporate thing back then. But back then, our studio was located in the Lowell neighborhood known as Spaghettiville, because it was it was right next to the Prince Spaghetti factory. And so we would come in and we would smell the pasta from across the street, and it was a fairly modest operation.
Yeah. So that was you're the Lowell Playhouse, and then you're this sort of love of like theater and acting, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I've always wanted to do that. In fact, a few years later, I got involved with community theater. I had 3 roles in the Andover Community Theater production of The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Was it really? That's awesome. That was one of the ones that's always lost in my background talking about movies my mom introduced me to. Easy to say Indiana Jones or Blues Brothers or Star Wars, but I think my mom always liked country music. Of course, Dolly Parton is in Horace in Texas. So I did. She probably shouldn't have been showing that to her kid, but I did see Who Doesn't Love Burt Reynolds. So we did watch that several times. I think the movie version, but I guess it was originally a play. That
was a play, and I was in a local version of it, and a lot of fun.
Well, you were the Burt Reynolds role.
No, obviously. I had 3 side roles. What was in it? Rufus Poindexter was one of my characters' names, and it was. I got to put on my phony Texas accent, trying to remember how Lyndon Johnson talked when I was a kid, and that was a helpful.
You have to give us a little bit of that. Right?
Well, back then, Lyndon Baines Johnson was president of the United States, and he was, he talked like this, and he tried really hard not to sound like he was a country bumpkin from Texas, but he was, and if I can tell a little story here,
you can.
I'm a huge fan of the Beatles. I always will be. I was so fortunate to grow up at that time. And one of the stories about the Beatles' first movie, A Hard Day's Night, was the American distributors were worried because, we thought we had heard what an English accent sounded like, but Liverpudlian was something very different. And the producers, the American distributors, some of them were worried that no one would be able to understand what John, Paul, George, and Ringo were saying, and there was serious talk of dubbing in their voices with something a little less Liverpudlian, and Paul McCartney put a stop to that. The exact quote was, and I hope we can get this past our censors, but the exact quote was,
we can.
He was referring to Lyndon Johnson, who was president at the time. He said, "Listen, if we can understand that fucking Texas cowboy, those Americans can understand us."
Who was the cowboy? They were
Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, there you go.
Yes,
okay.
the president of the United States at the time.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So wait. So what were your roles? There was Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
I played one of the.
That was the only play you did. That you did multiple characters in that same.
Right.
Play?
3 characters in that play, and then I later did a dramatic play for the Andover Theater Company, which sadly I think has long since gone out of business. But it was just the community theater group, and I did a play with them that was their offering at a community theater competition. It was held at Brandeis University back in I think 1990 or thereabouts, and I had the lead role in that play, and it was early on in the competition, and I saw the other plays, and I said, why don't I just go home? They're not going to nominate anything I did. Well, it turns out, and he kept saying, oh, no, stay. Mm-hmm. So I stayed. Turns out I was nominated for Best Actor. I didn't win, but I got nominated.
Yeah,
so I'm glad I stayed. Yes. It's an honor just to be nominated, yes.
So what was that other...
Oh, it was called Special Guest. I don't know who the playwright. I don't remember who the playwright was.
That was like a locally written.
Yeah, it was like well, not locally written, but it was like it's kind of a ghost story of a man who was murdered came back to life, and I played I think it was the police inspector trying to find out more about the killing, and anyway, the guy was killed, haunted me, or something like that. I don't remember it that well, but
you don't remember any of your lines from?
No, I don't. I've always been. I grew up very. I guess this is one reason why I turned to creative stuff, or stuff I think is creative.
Yeah.
I was very very shy in school. I was very frightened, and I had some rough times in school. I had some rough times at home. So I basically wanted to draw myself into a shell, and hopefully no one would notice me. So so acting and self-expression did not come easy for me, but when later on I became more attracted to it. Yeah, it was a good way to. It
was like exposure therapy,
right?
Kind of,
so it was one. I guess you could say it was a form of therapy later on, because I was. The earlier me would have been too terrified to have stood on stage in front of anyone. I was, I'd be memorized with stage fright. But later on, I conquered those demons, and I didn't get a great acting career out of it, but it was a good, like I say, it was very therapeutic to actually do that.
Yeah, that's what they say about improvisational theater too, which I did at Improv Boston. Right. It kind of gets you out of that shell, out of the comfort zone.
Oh yeah, well, improv is interesting because here again, I'm the old sage here. I can remember.
Of course, that's why we have you on.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, of course, improv started in a big way right here in Boston and Cambridge, and there was actually a theater group called the Improv. I believe Jane Curtin, one of the original members of the Saturday Night Live cast from 1975, she was a member of that group. And in Boston always had a great thriving theater scene. A lot of very talented people came out of the I don't know what you call it, the underground theater scene in Boston in the 60s. Of course, a lot of them were Harvard and Radcliffe students, and or went to BU. Like Faye Dunaway went to BU, and John Lithgow went to Harvard, and Stockard Channing went to Radcliffe, and so we had a lot of those people there. But it was also, of course, Boston was a hub of the counterculture, so a lot of those theater groups came. The whole improv thing, which later, of course, became the whole improv comedy thing, came out of Boston. The people who emerged later, the Saturday Night Live people, people like Robin Williams, I think that thing kind of started in Boston back in the 60s, or there were other pioneers. There were people like Jonathan Winters and others of that ilk, and that sort of thing. But Boston was a big birthplace, I guess you could say, of improv.
I also took a video art class over at CCTV Cambridge, and they were talking about, I think, 1960s, 70s, like origins of video art kind of came out of Boston too. I wonder.
Well,
what
name
it was
June
about
Paik at Channel 2.
They were say that again. They were telling us
name. I hope I'm pronouncing his name. Nam June Paik. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He worked at another one of my alma maters, Channel 2, WGBH. Back then, public TV as we know it today was just starting. It originally started as something called educational TV, and then, thanks to Lyndon Baines Johnson, who signed the Public Television Act of 1967, this cluster of non-commercial stations that were, they had their licenses held mainly by colleges and universities. And of course, WGBH was like the Vatican of public TV. It was, everyone looked upon it as the greatest public TV station in the country back then. And of course, their license was held by all the colleges and universities: Harvard, MIT, BU, BC, etc. Museum of Fine Arts, Museum of Science. So anyway, back then there was a wild spurt of creativity on television, and Nam June Paik was a guy at Channel 2, and he basically gave birth to modern video art. Because he had the opportunity at Channel 2 at WGBH to do these kinds of things, and GBH did some really funky programming back then. There was another wacky show called What's Happening, Mr. Silver. I hope they preserve some of those videotapes, because that was like the closest thing to underground television we had in America, was some of the stuff they were doing on Channel 2. And of course, later on, it got much more staid and much more establishmentarian. But it was a great. Of course, all the great documentary filmmakers that came out of Boston. Fred Wiseman, Errol Morris. Fred Wiseman, I guess, I don't know if they had a deal. He had a deal with Channel 2, but all of his sort of, what do you call them, cinema verite documentaries, where he would he'd bring his camera into like a police station or a mental hospital. Probably his most famous film was Titicut Follies. He actually brought his camera into I forget what it was called, the Massachusetts Asylum for the Criminally Insane. Nice. And of course it was banned for a long time, but he had a I guess a working relationship with Channel 2. I don't know if he actually worked under their auspices, but we had some really creative and interesting and groundbreaking people in Boston in those days, whether it was video, film, music, improv theater, improv comedy. Boston was a great place to be back then. Well, it still is in some ways. So.
Yeah, and you were kind of soaking up all that stuff.
Yeah, well, I was like a 10-year-old kid out in Methuen, so I wasn't exactly, immersed in that scene, but you could see it around the fringes of what was going on, and and once in a while the local news stations, TV stations would do features on them, and the radio stations. Boston, a great radio scene back then. All kinds of amazing creative people, and sometimes they would do reports on them. So it was, it was. I got some of it. I wasn't, I was not a hippie. Let me make that clear. I was way too straight and scared to do that. But you did absorb some of that just from being around this area.
Was there a moment where you broke bad, Hartley? Where you were no longer straight?
Well, I guess you could say it was when I was in junior high school, and my happy childhood was coming to an abrupt end, becoming my very unhappy adolescence. And I was.
Was it a real? When you say happy childhood, do you mean that, or did?
Yeah, it was for the most part. So, school wasn't much fun.
So times at home were okay then, or?
Well, back then I was too young and too immature and too, frankly, ignorant to realize some of the bad things going on around me, like my parents' marriage, for example. But adolescence is like, for me anyway, it was like it was the bill became due, as it were.
That's good.
And I learned my parents did not have a good marriage. They didn't particularly like
Innocence
me.
lost.
Right, didn't like me a whole lot. And of course, school was like hell on earth because I was getting the excrement beaten out of me every day, both physically and psychologically. And for me, it was the epiphany. The thing that really jolted me was one day I was listening to a radio documentary. It was on WRKO, which was the big top 40 station in Boston in those days. It was a creation of the legendary top 40 radio programmer Bill Drake. It was a documentary called The History of Rock and Roll. And I remember listening to it And the announcer kept saying that they were going to do something they were going to devote an entire hour to Bob Dylan. And I thought I knew who Dylan was. I mean, I knew that he did Like a Rolling Stone, and he did Blowing in the Wind, and one of my friends who lived down the street was crazy about him. So, I had a fair idea what it was. But something inside of me said, as I heard this promo for the Dylan segment, something inside of me kept saying, you must listen to this. You must listen to this. And finally, they started playing the Dylan segment. The first song they played was Subterranean Homesick Blues. And wow, that hit me like a bomb. That was like a religious revelation. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's singing about what I'm going through now. And I immediately became the biggest Bob Dylan fanatic in the world, and just was totally blown away by him. That period of my life didn't last too long because, Dylan, of course, by that time, the late 60s, he was doing like country western stuff, and he was moving away from that period in his own work. But that was and then from there, I got into, I wanted to hear a radio station where they played Bob Dylan all the time, or played the Beatles all the time. And Top 40 was like moving away from that. Top 40 was getting into like bubblegum and schlock. And then I heard about WBCN, the legendary alternative radio station in Boston at the time, generally considered to be the best of its kind of any radio station of that sort ever created. And I turned on BCN, and all of a sudden it was like, I get it now. I get what these hippies are all about, because they played Bob Dylan, they played the Beatles, and they opened my mind. That station opened my mind up to all kinds of things, and politics and culture and so forth. And
who were some of the DJs and sort of the central figures back at that time?
A man who I'm proud to say is still a very good friend of mine, Charles Laquidara. He was one of the, I don't know if he was one of the original group that came in 1968, but he came in just a few years later. And there was one of the original MTV DJs, J.J. Jackson, was also one of the original announcers at BCN when it turned into a rock station, this alternative station. And I remember Charles I didn't get to know Charles personally for several more decades, but once I did, he was just a wonderful man, just a wonderful guy. And when BCN finally went belly up in, I think it was 2009, they were having a private party to celebrate BCN's heritage through the decades, not just the original 1968 class, but everyone who came after that. And Charles, God bless him, was nice enough to invite me, a non-BCN person. And I remember talking to a lot of the people who, going back to those days, people like Joe Rogers and Tommy Hadges and John Brody and Jim Parry and Al Perry and Deborah Ullman, Maxine Sartori. I mean, I don't know if these names mean anything to you, but they were the people who made BCN what it was. They had total freedom to say whatever they wanted to do or play whatever they wanted.
Even
to
up
play.
till when I was in high school, like early 2000s, WBCN was a landmark,
still was.
Really cool thing. And then when it fizzled out, like radio hasn't been the same, I think, anywhere, but especially in Boston.
Not. But I remember talking to someone. J.J. Jackson sadly had passed on by then. But I remember meeting one of his friends who worked with him at BCN, and this guy said that J.J. Jackson told him that the years he spent at BCN, those first few years when he was a BCN announcer, meant more to him than his years as one of the first MTV DJs. Being on MTV made him a national celebrity. But he said that didn't mean as much to him as those early years at BCN. And I think that tells you a lot about the kind of place BCN was in those days. Both the people who worked there and the people who listened to it. Because it was our clearinghouse for everything, not just music, but politics. I got to know, let me just lubricate my...
Sure, I'll talk. BCN, really, there was like sort of a sense of community, and the DJs were sort of... you kind of like looked up to them, but they were also
Right.
they were also your best friends too at the same time.
Yeah, well,
you know, so-
as was the case with Charles Laquidara, I grew up listening to Danny Schechter's newscasts, Danny Schechter, the news dissector. And the same thing, I didn't get to know him personally for several decades, but once I met him and got to know him as a friend, he was exactly the same kind of person in person that he was on the radio. And he was a really groundbreaking alternative journalist. If you ever see that documentary film that Bill Lichtenstein, who was another BCN person, made, I think it was called WBCN, The American Revolution, please do, because Danny went above and beyond. Probably, if he were around today, Trump would have him killed. That's the kind of guy he was. And he told about back when during they had a big student protest at Harvard, and they occupied the various buildings and so forth. And it turns out one of the buildings they occupied and rifled through their files was very sensitive information about Harvard's relationship to the CIA.
Wow. Okay.
And so after the cops were called in and cleared out, I hope I'm telling this story right. If I'm not, but it's in this movie, in this documentary. Danny contrived to, an associate of his contrived to enter what were now the walled off and sealed off and chained off gates to Harvard University. And he said to the cops or whoever it was who were obstructing people from coming in, "Oh, please, my master's thesis is in there," or he used some excuse. "Master's thesis is in there, and I've got to get it, or else I'll flunk out." And they let him in, and they went right to the building where the CIA files were, and they grabbed everything they could, and they ran out of there. And they, "Well, thank you for letting us in," and so forth. And the next day, it appeared in one of the Boston Underground papers, whether it was the Phoenix or the Real Paper, one of those. Detailing, how all the skullduggery that Harvard people were up to with the CIA, overthrowing governments and, putting LSD in people's water and all this.
Was this a real thing?
Yeah, it was real. This was very real. Yeah. And it it totally freaked out the government. And so Danny.
What year was that? Do you
remember? It was like 1969, 1970. Okay.
Wow.
But watch that documentary. Again, it was made by Bill Lichtenstein, who was one of the WBCN people.
What's it called again?
WBCN, The American Revolution.
Okay. I think there's also a book that
it was a companion book to it that came out that Bill Lichtenstein wrote and published a lot of the photographs. By the way, it wasn't just BCN in those days. You had the Real Paper. You had the original Cambridge Phoenix, which became the Boston Phoenix.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Okay. And you had some really amazing...
All of those alternative weekly papers are gone now, too.
Yeah, all those underground papers, the hawkers.
Those are the papers who actually wrote about us in the Experimental Film Festival.
Yes. Well, back then... Harvard Square was to Boston what Greenwich Village was to New York.
Yeah.
Really a bohemian and underground.
Now they don't have room for us in the bigger
right.
papers. Right?
So back then, of course, this was pre-internet, all the stuff we have now. They actually, used paper to put news on.
Right.
They called them newspapers.
From trees.
And so you would have the hawkers, as they were called. Kids from the neighborhood would go down to where the Phoenix was or where the Real Paper was, gather up all these papers, and they would sell them on the street, right? Right at out of town newsstand or wherever it was in Cambridge or Boston, and they get to keep some of the money that they gathered when they. So it was a great distribution setup, and so you get out to the people that they wanted to get the papers out to, and so these papers had great writers and people like John Landau, who later came to fame as Bruce Springsteen's manager and producer. He was the top music writer first at the Phoenix and then at the Real Paper, and of course It was at the Harvard Square Theater in 1973 where John Landau first saw Bruce Springsteen perform and wrote his famous review. He said, "I have seen the future of rock and roll, and its name is Bruce Springsteen." Back then, Springsteen was known by very few. But he would actually appear in places like the Harvard Square Theater or Jack's in Cambridge, which was like smaller than your apartment, and it would be crowded with tons of people and performers.
Nice.
And you know, so that's Boston can claim that it helped get Bruce Springsteen known. I mentioned Maxine Sartori from WBCN. She would, on her show, she would play unknowns, and one of those unknowns was a band called Aerosmith.
Oh yeah,
and that's where they got known. And the Phoenix and the Real Paper, they had these amazing photographers, people.
So
like,
the Real Paper, that's the name. The name of it.
Well, what happened was there were all kinds of like funky, weird underground papers in Boston in those days. These hippie outfits.
Yeah.
But probably the best of them was the Cambridge Phoenix. And that's where John Landau wrote. That's where other great writers like Joe Klein and Harper Barnes and my late friend, the great theater critic Arthur Friedman, and a lot of other incredibly talented people wrote. So one day, back in 1972, these writers didn't get along particularly well with the management of the Cambridge Phoenix. And there was this lesser paper in Boston called Boston After Dark. And one day, the staff of the Phoenix woke up to find that their owner had sold the Phoenix as a business to Boston After Dark, which promptly rechristened itself the Boston Phoenix.
Okay, well,
and that left just about all of, there was one exception. There was a sports writer named George Kimball who went over to the new Phoenix. Otherwise, all these writers for the old Phoenix, the Cambridge Phoenix, were now out of a job. So in retaliation, they formed a collective. They formed a new newspaper, which they called the Real Paper, claiming they were the real Phoenix, and this other Phoenix was an imposter.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so they ran it as a collective, kind of a hippie dream of worker-owned enterprise, a socialistic creation. And the funny thing is, it succeeded. It succeeded financially. It succeeded creatively. There was some incredible writing in that paper. I mentioned John Landau's Bruce Springsteen review, and really amazing people. Unfortunately, they couldn't keep it together. And there was some kind of all kinds of internal problems. Finally, the paper got sold to a member of the Rockefeller family. Okay. And it became run like any other paper. But you had some great writers there. You had great photographers, people like Peter Simon, who is Carly Simon's brother. Jeff Albertson. These guys would take a lot of the pictures of the rock stars when they came into Boston. And back then, Boston was, of course, a big music town. It always is. But back then, you had a performance space in Boston called the Boston Tea Party, which was like Boston's version of the Fillmore theaters, if you ever heard of those, in San Francisco and New York. And back then, you could see people like The Who and an up-and-coming band from England called Led Zeppelin, and people that you would later have to take out a second mortgage on your house to see in a big stadium. Back then, for $1.98, you could see these people, these mega superstars, in this little theater called the Boston Tea Party. And wow, it was. And WBCN actually had a studio at the Boston Tea Party, and they would get to interview these people as soon as they got off stage.
At the theater? Wow, I've never heard of this before, the Boston Tea Party.
I'm happy to be the historian.
You're like historian.
I'm happy to be the historian of record here, folks.
Yes, that's right.
And so,
Did you get to go to that
No,
venue?
I was still way too young and way too scared, I was afraid if I inhaled any marijuana smoke, I'd become a psychotic lunatic.
That's what they told us.
That's what they told us. Right. I was very much a wimp and a weakling in Methuen. Never mind Boston. First time I ever walked into Boston on my own, I got mugged. So that was kind of a bad experience. So, but even though I was way out in the suburbs, way out in a place like Methuen, Every night, every day, I'd listen to BCN, and if I could get my hands on the real paper of the Phoenix, I would grab it, and that was like this entry into this fascinating world of incredible people, whether it was rock stars or writers or whomever. And it was a lot of fun. As long as you weren't drafted, it was a lot of fun to be young and in Boston in those days. And the Boston people kind of kept the counterculture thing going much longer in Boston than in other cities. Eventually, it faded out, and other bad things happened in Boston. There were the busing riots and things like that. People realized Boston wasn't this hippie haven after all, that there were some pretty awful people in Boston. It was a very racist city back then. But BCN, the real paper, the Phoenix, there was another great radio station, WCAS in Cambridge, that was like a folk station. They carried on the great folk revival that happened in Boston in the 50s and early 60s. Club 47, of course, that's where one of the places Bob Dylan started. One of the places,
where was that? That was
right at 47 Auburn Street, Mount Auburn Street in Cambridge. Okay. It's still there, and it's still a club. It's now called Club Passim.
Okay.
But Club 47 was like all the great folkies, Dylan and Joan Baez and Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell and Dave Van Ronk and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. All these people, Club 47 was like, one of the stations of the cross you had to visit. And
you know, how you earn your stripes in Boston underground.
Right. So WCAS, it was like a daytime station. They had to sign off at sunset, but they called themselves the Cambridge station, and they would keep playing these people long after the folk revival ended. It was sort of like a miniature version of WBCN. It was a great place, and maybe the world wasn't that great a place back then. I mean, Nixon was president.
That's right. Is a lot of this nostalgia and rose-colored glasses.
And the nostalgia has its price, and we there were a lot of bad things going on in the world and in Boston back then. But if you were young and you were trapped out in the suburbs like I was, you'd turn on BCN or you'd open up the real paper, and it was like, wow, these people have got it together. Let's go down to Harvard Square and hang out. That was. That was the great goal of so many suburban kids back then.
And now they've destroyed the pit in Harvard Square.
Yeah,
where people would hang out.
Yeah, well, it's sad that, of course, out-of-town newsstand is gone. A lot of those great stores and shops and restaurants have been taken over by national chains, and a lot of the bookstores have closed. Of course, people don't read books anymore, so. Or people don't buy records anymore. So I think I read somewhere, it's been a while since I've been there, but even the Harvard Coop the Harvard Co-op store has pretty much gotten rid of its book department, which was the main reason for going there. You wanted a book about anything, it was in Harvard Square, whether it was the Harvard Coop or the Harvard Bookstore, which wasn't part of the university, but it was in Harvard Square. I hope some of those places are still open, but a lot of them are gone now. Me, I was a big newspaper and magazine guy as late as the 90s. I would go into Harvard Square. A friend of mine and I would go into Harvard Square, and I'd hit the out-of-town newsstand, which I don't know if you remember it, but it was right at the gate of Harvard Yard, and they would have newspapers there and magazines there from all over the world, because of course they were catering to the Harvard students who were coming from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And there would be papers from LA and San Francisco and St. Louis and Chicago and Miami and Houston and all over the country, and papers from Europe, from France, from Belgium, from Germany, from Italy, and magazines too. And I remember going through the magazines once, one of the Italian magazines. They would actually have whole aisles that would say German magazines, Italian magazines, French magazines. And I remember looking through. I don't understand Italian, so I was mainly looking at the pictures. I figured I'd get an Italian magazine, and there'd be pictures of Sophia Loren and Marcello Mastroianni and Federico Fellini, and guess what? They did a whole photo spread on the cast of Beverly Hills 90210. And I said, wow. America is ruining the world. What can I say? Even people in Europe, they're transfixed by Hollywood. So
right, it's just popular culture.
But it was a great place, and I'd go in there, and I didn't earn much money back then. Still am not earning much money now, but I would come home like with tons of magazines and newspapers, none of which I ever had time to read, and they would pile up. And
from the Hartley Cribs video, we know you have trouble throwing away these.
Yeah. Well, every place I've ever lived, I've gotten into trouble with whoever my landlord was, including my own family members.
Oh no!
Because of all these bloody newspapers. And I remember one time I encountered a relative of my landlord. I think this was in Pepperell, Mass, where I lived at the time, and came up and said, "You're the guy with all those newspapers, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me." Yeah, so didn't know my name, but they knew that I was the collector of so many newspapers and magazines and so forth. I don't know. It just turned me on to actually have that news, my fingers feeling that newsprint and feeling the texture of the paper, and now that's all gone.
Sure.
I mean, I'm a neater person now because of the cyber revolution, because just about all the newspapers and magazines I used to read have gone out of business. So I don't clutter things up as much anymore. But yeah, I miss Harvard Square being that central location for all the things I revered. There used to also be a business right in Harvard Square called Revolution Books, and it was, talk about being on the left. This was like literally a communist bookstore. And you go in there, and there'd be these books written by Marx and Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky. And I remember reading one of the communist newspapers that said why Fidel Castro was really a secret American agent. I mean, they suspected that he was a capitalist rotor. And my friend and I would go into Harvard Square, and we'd always hit Revolution Books because it was just so amazing to see all this way left-wing stuff, a whole store of it. I remember one day we walked out of that place, and I think I jokingly said to him, or he jokingly said to me, long after the communists are gone from Moscow, they'll still be here in Cambridge. And we thought it was a joke. Turned out to be true.
Yeah. Wow.
So anyway, those were the days.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 60s through the 90s. That was a fun place to be.
Yeah. So we were talking about communism, or the communists, Hartley. But yeah, no, I mean, it really does seem like back then, I mean, Boston is still great now, but the media and that culture and the counterculture.
Well, I don't know what we had. Well, there's still a lot of political activity now. I'll say this for Donald Trump. He certainly has inspired a whole generation of new political activists. Mm-hmm. But, and I guess you could say the cyber culture has changed everything, both for good and for bad. Mm-hmm. The bad part is we're living in a kind of a post-literate world. People don't read magazines or newspapers anymore because they don't need to. Mm-hmm. Everything is at the click of a button. And, right. And it's sad to see, the old out-of-town newsstand just, that now an empty, darkened kiosk, mm-hmm. and see all the old places where the bookstores used to be. And so some of the great restaurants as well. But the kids are still out there protesting, and of course now Trump wants to put Harvard out of business. So you can say that.
Is that what he said? That's
there is some spark still out there.
That's right. And there were still a few newspapers or like zines, like Boston Countercultural Compass was also one of the underground things going on, like relatively recently. They used to have kind of underground rock shows and stuff like 10 years ago or so at the Brookline Access TV
Well, I haven't
channel.
even mentioned the club scene in Boston.
Yeah.
Which was always, I think there have been about 10 documentary films made about that. The Channel, the Rat.
Oh yeah.
All those. I mean, Harper's Ferry. All those amazing clubs. I mentioned Jack's and the Harvard Square Theater earlier, but really the golden age of the Boston club scene was like the late 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah, I used to hear about the original Man Ray Club.
Man Ray, yeah.
And now they reopened.
It was Bunratty's in Allston. Of course, the whole Allston world, that sector between BU and BC on Commonwealth Avenue. I mean, that's like the ground zero of the Boston student scene. And, of course, all the great bands that came out of Boston. I've had one of my radio guests through the years a few times. I've had Robin Lane of Robin Lane and the Chartbusters. And, of course, Jay Giles came out of Boston, and Aerosmith came out of Boston.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers came out of Boston. And there was a big punk scene, and there was, the Paradise Rock Club, and too many to remember at this point. But it was, Boston's full of college kids and full of high school kids, and Boston's always been a center of whatever the youth culture is. But the club scene in Boston in those days was incredible. It was fantastic.
Were you at the center of it with the toilet seat around your neck, Hartley?
Yeah, no, I never got that far. No, I don't want to romanticize those places. They're really all dumps. I mean, you'd be afraid to use the toilets in some of those places. I mean, they were all, graffiti marked and everything else. It was, but if you didn't mind the rather, shall we say, low-level ambiance, but it was where youth culture thrived. I mean, the club scene in Boston, or it's any city, but I would say Boston being Boston with all the college kids, that was the place to be.
Yeah, I think now in the age of like social media, there's like less of a reason for people to leave their homes.
Yeah, well, one thing that also killed the club scene were the higher real estate prices. It's pretty hard, these clubs don't make a lot of money, and when the real estate vultures fly in and all the property values get jacked up, pretty soon you can't pay the rent, you can't pay the taxes, and you're gone, and some developer is going to come in and turn into luxury condos.
I mean, that's what seems to always happen with like the Improv Boston Theater went under during the pandemic. And then out of the blue, Art Gallery was moving around all the time because the rent would always get raised.
Yeah. Well, that's why it kind of spread out to places like, when it became too expensive to do these things in Cambridge, a lot of them moved to Somerville. Now Somerville's too expensive. I know Lowell, where I spend a good deal of my time, a lot of art galleries and performance places like that. The old mill buildings, some of them have been renovated into performance spaces or art galleries or whatever. So that's good. But the core around Boston, I hate to say it, but those days have come and gone, and maybe they'll come back. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully there'll be a resurgence.
Right.
With the people you're having on your radio show, spreading the word.
I'll do my best for them.
That's right.
There was. I've talked to a lot of the musicians from the '60s and '70s from all over the world, and they all say that maybe they're just saying this to make me feel good, but they would all say that Boston was always a great stop for them because of the the audiences were so vibrant and so appreciative, and you had radio stations like BCN and later FNX, and you had Boston people took a strong interest in the music and was very appreciative of it. So
Yeah. You keep being drawn to the music and the culture, and you're doing your part to spread these.
Yeah, well,
history of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm just going by memory here. I was not really a participant of all this. I hope I'm not coming across like I was the instigator of all this fun stuff. I was purely an observer.
Yeah.
But it was a great thing to watch. Let me put it that way. You could, even if you're out in Methuen where I was, you could still feel the vibes.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So how did you get, jumping back, we can always hear you on WCAP 980 AM in Lowell, right? But how did you get introduced to that place?
Well, actually, I worked at another Lowell radio station back in the 90s, and it was not a terribly pleasant experience. I won't name names, but I had the job of being one of the news people there. And apparently I took my job too seriously because the star of the station, a man very much in love with himself, didn't like one of the stories I was doing because it was apparently embarrassing one of his friends.
Okay.
And he came in, he just didn't like me from the get-go. I mean, he would talk smack about me when I wasn't around. One day he came in after I did a story. He said, "I don't want you doing a story like that anymore." So I figured, well, wait till the guy who runs this place hears about this. He's not going to like it. I figured here's this guy trying to protect his political friends and trying to shut me up. So I had a meeting with this guy, he actually owned the station, but he ran it. And for the next 3 hours, this gentleman ranted at me, telling me what a complete incompetent I was, how I was a detriment to the station, and I was, this, that, the other thing. And finally, he let me go, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I agree with what he said about you," referring to this star of the station. Well, to make a long story short, the guy later became a big shot in Boston radio, but he was no less of a bastard throughout his entire life. I remember people coming up to me when I worked at this station and said, "How can you put up with that guy?" But of course, they all kissed his ring because he was a powerful media guy. And when he died, it was like a state funeral. It was like a royal funeral. "Oh, we've lost this great man." And the old joke about give me a look at who's in his coffin. They're obviously not talking about the guy I knew. So anyway, but one good thing about that experience was that someone else had a show on that station and liked me. And a few years later, he took over co-ownership of WCAP and later the whole station. And I'd been doing news at that station for a while. CAP goes back, it's considered a legacy radio station. It goes back, I think, to the 40s. So he said, I'm doing news, but he said, "I think you'd like doing talk more than news." And I said, "Yeah, I think I would." So he gave me the talk show. He didn't pay me anything. He said he was very honest about that. He said, "Look, I can't pay you anything, but if you want exposure, if you want to talk on the radio, here. I can't sell any time on Saturday afternoons from like noon to 1. So if you want that slot, it's yours." And I said, "Thank you." And so basically I've been doing that ever since. And then a few months ago, he offered me the afternoon slot at CAP, and that's where I'm at now. So
the Saturday show is active radio.
Right. And the Monday through Thursday show from 3 to 5:30 or whenever I have to leave to go back to Townsend because I still have that job to do. It's called Afternoons with Hartley Pleshaw.
Yes.
So, So anyway, I do not lack for radio exposure in Lowell, Massachusetts. Whatever else you can say about me.
If only exposure was
Right.
currency.
Right. So.
But that's interesting. You started out doing the news. I mean, when you were at Emerson, or did you ever take any other classes like that?
No.
Did you ever have to do any like diction classes, or this was
No.
just always your natural?
The funny
Because
thing
you
is-
have the newscaster cadence down.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Well, the funny thing about Emerson was they had a great radio station there. They still do, WERS.
Yeah. It actually had like a reach out in the
Right,
city.
right. But
get it in your
I never
car.
worked there, and I never took any radio courses there. I did a little bit of radio at my undergraduate college, Merrimack College, but that was like a 10-watt stick in the mud situation.
Yeah.
And the only people who listened to it were the guys in the dorms who were drunk and stoned all the time.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, well, I've always been attracted to radio. Growing up in Boston with all the incredible radio talent here, I mentioned BCN. We had great radio stations in Boston. WBZ, which is still around. Back then, it was a combined top 40 station. Back in the '60s, top 40 station, and talk station. They actually had both of those things on the same radio station in those days. And one of the people I subsequently met, who I listened to way back in the day, WBZ was like the first radio station I really listened to in a big way because it was a big Beatles station back in '64 when the Beatles hit. Their nighttime guy was a really creative guy named Dick Summer. And lo and behold, some 50 years later, Dick Summer was doing a regular podcast, and among the stations he was podcasting on was WCAP at midnight, a show every midnight. And of course, by that time, Dick Summer was a legend. He had gone down to New York and had a great career there, and then he got into podcasting, and I subsequently got to meet him. In fact, he moved to the Merrimack Valley. So he became kind of a neighbor of ours. And, same thing happened with him that happened with Charles Laquidara and Danny Schechter. He was exactly the same kind of person in person that he was on the radio. Just an incredibly nice guy. Unfortunately, we lost him about a year ago. But he and Charles were my first two guests on my very first active radio back in on March 14th, 2015. Which I regard as kind of a symbolic date because it was on March 13th, 1967, that WRKO radio came on in Boston as a top 40 station. And it quickly became the #1 top 40 station in Boston and really in the whole country. It was considered a bellwether station. And I got to know some of the great people who worked there as well that I listened to as a kid. People like J.J. Jeffrey, who was the afternoon guy, and the guy who followed him, Chuck Knapp. And I've had both of them on my show. Wonderful people, amazing, great people. So anyway, that was that station came on March 13th, 1967. The following year, 1968, March 15th, 1968, WBCN, which had previously been a classical music station, went to an all-rock format and became, as I've been saying, one of the most important radio stations in American history. So those 3 March days, March 13th was when WRKO got started, March 15th is when WBCN got started, and my radio show, Active
Something
Radio
about March.
Right, got started March 14th.
Yeah.
So that I think is very symbolic. I'm in between those two great the dates of the foundings of those two great radio stations. And my first two guests on my very first program were Charles Laquidara and Dick Summer. I thought it would be very appropriate to have people on who were instrumental in getting me interested in radio. And every year after that, pardon me, give my voice a little bit of water there.
That's right.
every year I would try to have Charles and Dick on again as a celebrating the anniversary of my show. And early around March or April of last year of 2024, I had Dick on, and I knew he wasn't feeling well. He only died a couple of months later, but as bad as he was feeling, he still came on my show. And you know, what can I say about a man like that? He was just a wonderful human being, incredible talent. And even though he was not long for this world, he still got on my show. I didn't pay him anything. There was no reason for him to be on my show other than just being the kind of a man he was. So
so him and then
eternal blessings on his memory.
Yeah, Dick Summer and then Charles Laquidara. Like, could you did you just have to put in a call to those guys and they recorded?
Yeah, well, by that time I had gotten to know them as friends, so it was fairly easy. But I remember the first time I really met Charles. I was doing a TV talk show on the local access channel station in Pepperell, Mass, where I worked at the time. And I wanted to do a little talk show. I wanted to host it, so I invited Charles. And I figured, well, Charles is a big media guy. He's not going to pay any attention to a guy like me.
Right. He did the morning show on BCN,
right? The Big Mattress.
The Big Mattress was.
And,
from my mom talking about that.
Oh yeah, great, amazing show. Amazing people came out of that that show. Billy West, whom I'm sure you've heard of, the great voice of all those cartoons. He started with Charles. I mean, he did all those voices on Charles' show. So anyway, invited Charles on. He came up the next day and did the show. And just a remarkable guy, a very incredibly friendly, incredibly helpful. And so that's where I finally got to meet Charles as an individual after, you know, I felt like he was an old friend because I'd been listening to him for all those decades. Same thing with Danny Schechter. It was like, first time I met him, it was like meeting and talking to an old friend. Same thing with Dick Summers. Same thing with J.J. Jeffrey and Chuck Dapp. All these great radio people I grew up listening to as a young kid, and they were just amazing human beings, along with being very talented. So what can I say? It was an honor, a great honor to have known them, to have listened to them, and to have gotten to learn so much from them.
So how long?
So you want to know, to answer your question, a long way of answering your question, where did my radio education come from? It came from those guys.
Yeah.
Now, I never took a course in radio in college or any kind of school. Just growing up in Boston was the best radio education anyone could have.
So those were like would you say they were sort of like mentor figures to you, just how they were handling themselves?
Yeah, well, you know, I listened to them initially for the music, but they were such engaging people that I became real fans of them as talents and as people.
Yeah, that was back then where they gave you time on there to show your personality. You weren't just...
Yeah, well, back then you know, the stations, of course, it was a whole different media world back then. I'm not the world's biggest fan of the FCC, but back then, you know, they still had rules and laws that said you have to devote a certain amount of programming to the local community and respond to it. And, you know, and that was, I think, reflected in some of the people in Boston. And back then, you're right. Some of them, they had the courage to do their own thing, to say what they wanted to say. Sometimes it got them into trouble. It got Charles Laquidara into a lot of trouble many times. But you could be creative. You know, Dick Summer did all kinds of great comedy bits on his show. And it wasn't really opposed to the music. It was all part of the same package. Later on, as the century came to an end, of course, people like Howard Stern and Don Imus, you know, they would start.
Opie and Anthony were the guys.
Yeah. Well, they
right. They started here at WAF. I think, and then
right. Eventually, music.
The shock thing.
Oh yeah. Eventually, music became kind of superfluous, and they, you know, took over basically as talk personalities. But back then in Boston in the '60s and '70s and '80s, there was a real synergy between the music they played and the kind of announcers they were. I mean, listening to J.J. Jeffrey and Chuck Knapp during the Summer of Love, 1967, and hearing them introduce the Beatles and Aretha Franklin and all the Motown groups and the Rolling Stones and all of the amazing people from that year, which is still my favorite year after all these years. It was just they all fit, all the pieces and all the people fit perfectly. And I've had sorry to say, JJ left us a couple of years ago. I've had Chuck Knapp on my show. He's still very much with us on my show many times, and we always talk about what it was like to come into Boston in 1967. Chuck came from Fargo, North Dakota, so coming into Boston in a year like 67, that was like an incredible revelation for him. And of course, back then, the WRKO studios were right across the street from Fenway Park.
Wow.
And of course, that was the impossible dream year that the Red Sox were the worst team in baseball the year before, and that year they won the American League pennant. It was just an incredibly magical time. Whether people talk about San Francisco in '67, and I won't doubt any of the stories we've heard about that place back then. But Boston in '67 was, I wouldn't trade being from Boston in '67 for anything, because you had all this great music. All the baseball team was winning the pennant, and Chuck would talk about how he'd hear the cheers from Fenway Park during one of his shows, and and it was just a fantastic and fascinating time all the way around, and. I got to listen to them, and that's where I learned so much of my stuff, because I had the world's best teachers, I had the world's best classrooms.
Yeah. I think, like you say, WBCN coming to an end at 2009.
Yeah,
it didn't seem that long ago, but yeah, it's I think around 2008, myself and our buddy Lawrence Hawley, we were proud we got our friend Quincy Briscoe onto it was the Toucher and Rich radio show. They were sort of like the afternoon drive time show. They did comedy, talk about, I think they would do some sports and things, but Quincy was sort of like an eccentric character we worked with, made some movies and public access shows with and stuff, and that was sort of a highlight for him and for us to get to go to BCN and kind of be part of it as in the waning years. And they would talk about that it was just sort of the Red Hot Chili Peppers or whatever, like on a loop. You could kind of tell that it was kind of coming to an end, where it was a select few of those rock acts were sort of getting played ad nauseum, and commercial breaks seemed to be increasing, and it was fizzling out. Radio and everything, the media climate totally changed.
It did, and also we can debate the quality of the music changing as well.
Yeah.
But
and as they say, is rock music dead or something, or as far as that, the radio.
Well, pop music is as popular as it ever was. I mean, Taylor Swift draws like 1 million people and to these stadiums. But we can debate that. I would say that toward the end, you could tell Charles Laquidara, for example, was I was totally listening to his show for him and not really for the music by then. But I remember toward the end at BCN what they did. It was very nice of them to do this. They brought back a lot of the old personalities from the very beginning. People like I mentioned some of them, of course, Charles and Sam Copper and Al Perry and Joe Rogers, a.k.a. Mississippi Harold Wilson, and all those Debbie Ullman, all those great people came on at the end. But I also want to mention there were some great people at BCN after after the golden age, if you want to call it that. For me, it was anyway. But people like Lisa Traxler and Tammy Heidi and Catherine Lauren. Chachi Lopret, my great friend.
Yeah, I remember Chachi. Yeah,
right, that's where he originated his Beatles show, Breakfast with the Beatles.
Yeah,
and it was just right to the end. It was an incredible place. One more Charles Laquidara story for you.
Sure.
I mentioned Howard Stern. Howard Stern has admitted, he said this many times, that Charles was his great mentor, because Howard went to Boston University, and he would listen to Charles every morning, and Charles basically taught him. Again, I can't believe that Howard ever would have had a better classroom at BU than he had listening to Charles every morning, because Charles Laquidara really perfected and kind of invented that whole morning rock show host thing. A lot of people you mentioned the shock jocks, and a lot of people have, they turn into audio porn, whatever. But Charles had the perfect combination of outrageousness and skill and intelligence, and the people he brought on, like Billy West and Eddie Gorodetsky and Tom Sandman and people like that. They were very, very bright and creative people. So it was like a proving ground, a school for so many great people.
Yeah, and then of course, like, there were so many, I think, shows in other parts of the country trying to imitate that morning show style, that, like, the franchised version was like the Morning Zoo kind of thing, the Zoo Crew, or some cheesy imitation.
They never got anywhere near as good as Charles, in my opinion. They would try to, they would do a lot of, like I say, audio porn. And may I say that my good friend Mike Morgan was also a great morning show producer, and he still does a show on weekends at Mix 104.1, which was, of course, WBCN's old frequency.
Oh yeah.
And Mike was really good at it. He still is. I mean, when he was running the show on the morning show at Jamma 94.5, which was the rap hip hop station, the big rap hip hop station in Boston, I think in the 90s. He invented the jam scams and things like that.
The prank.
And he was great at it. He still is great at it. But trouble with Mike was he was too good at what he did. I mean, he would take every morning show, every station he was at, he would take him to the top of the ratings or the top of the demo, and then his corporate masters didn't want to pay him beyond a certain level, so they cut him loose. It was really, everyone will tell you in radio today is a skanky business. It's run by a bunch of assholes, and it's really a slimy business. As great and as wonderful and creative as a medium as radio is, the people running it today are just terrible people. I call them borderline criminals. But thankfully, you and I, we made it a big part of our lives before the bean counters and the crummy people took it over and destroyed it. So we were very privileged to be able to hear the last great era of American radio at its best before between that and the cyber revolution. I guess that was going to do in radio technologically anyway. Old-fashioned radio as we knew it, broadcast radio. But we were so lucky to hear these great people before the darkness fell.
Right. I remember, I think she was originally on WBCN, and then on WAAF, Carmelita was the DJ who did Bay State Rock, the local rock show. I think it was Saturday or maybe Sunday nights, and when I was in high school, I remember listening to that. Her dulcet tones, very easygoing, laid back, telling us all about this is the local rock scene that's happening right in the city. And it was really exciting to have that. And then I think, that was kind of a legacy show that then, that went away, and all these things. And I think, some of these guys have done some podcasts and things,
Right.
but you really have to search through and find all this stuff now.
Yeah.
And back in the day, just to turn the radio on.
Well, the good news is about the cyber revolution. We still have something like YouTube, which a lot of this is archived. It used to be back in the 80s or 90s. If you wanted to hear classic stuff from radio or TV, you had to go down to like the Museum of Broadcasting in New York.
Yeah, like once it was gone off
right,
the air, where would you
rent
find
a
it
cubicle.
again? Yeah.
Now, thanks to YouTube, a lot of this stuff has been preserved, and you can listen to it anytime you want. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I tell everyone, you want to hear radio at its best, go to YouTube and Google up names like Charles Laquidara and others of that ilk, and you'll hear radio when it was at its greatest, at its best.
Yeah, I remember recording. I think I recorded that last WWVCN air check or whatever. And I'm not sure where it is now, but even then, I remember in high school, I had one of my stereo. You could still use cassettes, record from the radio that way, and because there were special live shows. Yeah, there were special live. Concerts and stuff. Sometimes they would play. I remember hearing like the White Stripes for the first time, and a lot of bands I heard for the first time. You know?
Well, the people who took over BCN in particular in '68, the crazy hippies, they recognized they were all part of the whole thing. Was synergy. I mean, you had the music, you had the politics, you had the culture, and this is something else you'd find out watching that documentary, and I think several people said this. If you were in Boston in the summer of '68, and for probably a few years thereafter, and it was a nice summer day, and everyone was outdoors, you could drive Mass Ave from from Porter Square through Harvard Square all the way across the bridge into Boston, into Back Bay. And everyone's, windows would be open. Everyone's, the car windows would be open, or their apartment windows would be open, or drive down Comm Ave in Alston, where all the students lived there, and you could hear BCN continuously. Everyone listened to BCN. Everyone played it. Everyone heard it. And like you said, it was exactly what you called it. It was a community event. It was a community experience. Yeah. And it just drew people together. And it wasn't just the music, and it wasn't just the politics. Back then, some people didn't want to romanticize it too much because people had drug problems and other things, or they were running away from home. And what they would do is, since they didn't trust the cops, and they didn't trust their teachers, and they didn't trust their parents, a lot of kids who were having hard times, or even kids who were just people who were just looking for something they couldn't find anywhere else. They were looking to find their lost cat or dog, or they were a musician looking to form a band or join one. They would call the announcers at BCN who were on the air. Yeah. And, these were the people they turned to for help and advice, and my girlfriend's going through a bad trip. What do I do? And eventually, BCN formed what they called the listener line. Yeah, I remember. And they had a whole staff of people there for precisely that purpose. Any problem or any question you had, finding your lost pet, or finding a band to play in, or finding an apartment, or if you had a drug problem, or if you were running away from home and you wanted needed someplace to stay. They'd call the BCN listener line, and again, no one forced BCN to do this. They did it out of a sense of obligation to their audience. They felt that strongly connected to their audience. So yeah, the power of that actually like human voice, and on the other side of that microphone, the community. Yeah, and there's something weirdly like intimate. Right. YouTube, even if you didn't know them personally, they were your friends. They were the people you trusted. Yeah. And those were the people you went to, even though probably these announcers didn't know anything about, trying to find an apartment or whatever. But these were the guys you went to, or women you went to, because you trusted them, because they were like your friends, even if you never met them. But they were the people you trusted.
Yeah. There's something intimate too when it is that audio only format, like a phone call with like a friend or something like that. Yeah.
Right. There was this tremendous connection between the audience and the radio station. And again, this was before Facebook. It was before Instagram. It was before email. It's a lot easier now to reach out to people than it was then, but it's far less rewarding. Let me put it that way. I mean, you reach out to a radio station now, and you're going to get. You're going to get the robo voice telling you to press 5 or press 6 or whatever. Back then, you'd call BCN, and it'd be Charles Laquidara, there'd be Maxine Sartori. They would be the people that actually answer the phones and talk to you.
That's right. And we also had, when I was in high school, we used to listen to Nick Carter the afternoons.
Right.
Yeah. I think, was it the Afternoon Fiasco, or what was his show called? Right. And then we had this... guy we knew, Jamie Branson, used to run the phone. He was on the phones for years, I think, for a Nick Carter show, and then Nick would poke fun at him and stuff, and then we came to meet him, and we put him on one of our Access shows back in the day. But yeah, no, it was really exciting what was happening with Boston radio, and there were only a few. I mean, there was Chronicle and stuff on television, but there were hardly any really truly local TV shows. And radio was sort of that last beacon.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, there was some great television in Boston those days. I mentioned WGBH during the 60s and 70s. That was a great place. And when WCVB took over Channel 5, took over the license for Channel 5, I think it was in 1972. They had a whole mess of great programs, talk shows and so forth. Of course, once they got the license and they got taken over, they started off with local investors and they got taken over by a corporation. All that kind of changed, although I'm glad they still have Chronicle. That's a great show. Yeah. And we had some... but I don't think we ever had anything really like alternative television the way we had alternative radio.
Right, there was more flexibility, more freedom.
But we still had some great... very enormously talented TV people in Boston in those days.
My grandfather, I think, used to work. He was like a security guard. He worked at Channel 5, and they had the show 5 All Night, Live All Night.
Oh yeah,
Did
that
you know
was
that
a
show?
funky show.
Because my mom talks about, I guess she got to go there, and I guess they got to see, like, I think William Shatner was a guest on that show. And
now that was like, you could say that was like alternative television.
Yeah, I never saw that.
Oh, I loved it. It was great. Everyone watched it. It was like what public access TV would later become. Only this was a broadcast station in a major market.
Yeah.
And you'd have musicians come in, and you'd have comedians, and you'd have jugglers and improv people, and it was a great show. In fact, the first host of that show was Matt Siegel, who had started off at BCN. Right. He started off. He was the guy who took over for Charles after Charles's morning show ended. Then he went over to 5 All Night, Live All Night, and then of course he got his own radio show, and he became a legend. And I guess for the next 40 years, he had the most popular show in Boston. That was another wellspring of talent.
Yeah, I remember taking. It was like in middle school, high school, or something. I got to take a tour of the Mix 98.5 radio station, and I think it was, I don't know if he was still there, but it was John Lander in the morning.
Oh yes, I remember hearing about him.
And he used to do, his prank calls were called Nutcrackers, I think. So
yes.
I remember that because they used to listen to that on the way to school. So that was kind of, it was kind of exciting to get to check out stuff like that. I think I remember taking a tour of WGBH too around that time.
Yeah, well, I was very lucky. When I was a graduate student at Emerson, I interned at GBH, and I interned on the program, the long-form documentary series that was eventually called Vietnam, A Television History.
Okay.
And I got to work with some of the best documentary filmmakers in the world. Oh, it was that to me was that was the best job I have ever had before or since. No disrespect to some of the people I'm working for now, but
Sure.
it was like dying and going to heaven. I mean, it was about the Vietnam War, so it wasn't exactly we weren't exactly talking about a fun subject.
Right.
We had to you're talking the show that I got in the credits for was about Cambodia and Laos, and of course Cambodia, we had the terrible genocide there. But to work with those people who were so dedicated and talented and fearless. I mean, this was the first major television documentary series about Vietnam since the war had ended, and no one wanted to talk about Vietnam anymore. They wanted to forget about it. It was like a dark chapter in history that people just didn't want to deal with. But these guys, I mainly worked with the British team that came over. It was a co-production of WGBH, a British network, and a French network. And I worked with the British team, and they were just an amazing bunch of people. I have, it was like I say, it was like dying and going to heaven.
So, what was your specific job on that?
I think I was in the credits on the Cambodia and Laos program. Assistant film research is the credit they gave me. Basically, I was an intern who. I spent a lot. They gave me a Harvard library card, so I did a lot of research at Widener Library and Lamont Library, and it was a lot of research. And I did get involved. I was present at a couple of the interviews. Nothing too elaborate, but oh yeah, it was fun. And then when a couple of the people on the project they went over to Europe or to Asia to do interviews there, and they needed someone to house sit for them. And they had this beautiful apartment.
So this was the perks of the
on
job.
Mount Auburn Street.
Yeah.
And so for like three months, I lived like a bleeping king. I had
awesome.
the best pad in Boston, and it was just. Pardon me. It was just a wonderful time. Of course, the Vietnam War was not a wonderful.
Right. The subject matter wasn't so glamorous, but the project.
But to think that I was involved with those people doing this really important bit of work, and it was really and the reception we got was really incredible. And after that series came out, you had a lot of people, a lot of veterans who had stored up things inside of them, finally began to talk and start to be able to deal with what they had gone through. To think you were involved, even on a very tangential level. I was just just a little intern.
So this
But
was
to think I was involved with something that important was just an amazing experience.
So was this after your time at Emerson?
This was during my time at Emerson. Yeah. I remember I heard about when I started at Emerson. Heard about an internship at Channel 2, and I figured, well, I'll probably have to clean up after Julia Child or something.
Right.
How she used to throw things around, throw food around. I'd probably have to clean up after. And then I called them, and the woman who answered the phone said Vietnam Project.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, I got the wrong number." And I said, "Who are you trying to reach?" I said, "I'm trying to reach WGBH." And yeah, we're WGBH, and we're doing this documentary series about the Vietnam War. And I said, "Wow." I said, "Well, I'm trying to get an internship. Can you get me in?" And they got me in, and the rest was just amazing.
So then it cuts to you at the pad, and you were like Tom Cruise in Risky Business, like sliding across.
Yeah, well,
the floor
with
in your
one
underwear.
exception, I didn't have much of a romantic life. But I will say this, though.
I was gonna say that was your chance to have the chick magnet pad.
Yeah,
hardly.
well, here's the thing about that. At the same time all this was going on, I was going through my first serious romantic relationship, which ended very, very badly. And those guys that I worked with on the Vietnam Project, they helped me get through that.
Yeah.
That was like one of if not the roughest time in my life. I won't go into all the details, but it was it was pretty bad, and those guys helped get me through it. So God
Yeah.
bless them. I don't know if I haven't been in touch with them through the years, but they will always have a very, very special place in my heart.
Yeah. So keeping creative
Yes.
through it all,
Right.
kind of as like a therapy thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I can vibe with that. I think that's what we're
Yeah.
all about here. Is there anything else that we haven't hit on that you want to hit on? Or should we plug some stuff?
I'm trying to think. I think we pretty much covered it as far as like my media life is concerned.
That's right.
Other things you probably don't want to know about. I won't tell you about that failed romance. But
You have to go through the long list of all of your loves.
well, there haven't been too many.
There's the open screen logo girl, and then
oh yeah, well I definitely fell in love with her. Yes.
right, that we keep
Yes.
every month of the open screen they show.
Yes.
It's the Sony Portapack camera, I think.
Yeah, she looks
there's
like
some
that open
mystery
screen girl. She kind of looks like a groovy chick from the '60s. So that's one of the
probably
reasons
is.
I fell in love with her.
She has that. It's not quite the beehive hairdo.
Right.
It's like a bob hairdo, or what's that all about?
Something like that. It was almost like the Twiggy look. Remember Twiggy?
Yeah, I think
you've
so.
heard of her. I
I've
think
heard
you
of
probably
her.
don't
I've
remember.
at least heard of her. Yeah.
Yes, but yeah, that was
like a model.
and all those Carnaby Street birds, as they call them in London. I mean, they were all with the mini skirts and the hair, like people like you've heard of some of them, like Marianne Faithfull and and all those groovy chicks from back then.
Yeah, that's right.
That is a look I will always be attracted to.
Yeah, or maybe they had some go-go boots going on.
Oh yes.
Boots.
Yeah, Nancy Sinatra and
Oh yeah, Nancy Sinatra. right, yeah.
Oh yeah, she was a real groovy chick. Let me tell you.
Yeah. And I always keep an eye on your socials to let me know what Jennifer Lopez is doing lately.
Oh God, yes.
She had
I
some
love
ups and downs.
I love J-Lo. I just hope her two failed marriages with Ben Affleck don't put her off guys from Massachusetts.
Sure, right.
I look forward to becoming Mr. Jennifer Lopez one of these days, and I hope he does. I hope her unfortunate, unsuccessful marriages with Ben Affleck, she won't hold that against me when we finally meet and I tell her, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Massachusetts." And no.
She'll have PTSD.
I'm not like Ben. Don't hold that against me.
That's right. Yeah. So it was two. Was she married to him twice now?
I think so.
She was with him once, broke up.
Yeah.
And it was Mark Anthony or somebody, right?
Yeah, I think was married to him for a while too.
Yeah.
But I think, of course, I'm not a big celebrity gossip person, but I think.
But we always have to get your take.
Yes,
you always
but one of the gossip stories I heard was when she broke up with Ben Affleck the first time. It was because he had cheated on her. I don't know if this is true. Ben, if you're watching this or listening to this, this is speculation. Don't sue me.
Yeah, I love you, Ben.
All right. You're a great actor too, I want to say. But I was thinking to myself.
That was a great Dunkin' Donuts commercial.
Yes, absolutely.
With Kevin
I was thinking
Smith
to myself, who could possibly be more beautiful and sexier than Jennifer Lopez? I wish I got to see that person, whoever she was, because to get you to cheat on Jennifer Lopez, my God, that
it shows you it's always there's always somebody sick of that. There's always
it's like Bill Gates robbing a bank. I mean, why would you why would you want to do that? I mean,
right. So he's just getting. You always want what you can't have or what you don't have.
Something like that. Yeah.
So you're always.
But Jennifer, if you're watching or you're listening, I will be totally faithful to you. Believe me.
Yes.
I will. I'll be happy to be your. What was his name? What Erwin Bach was to Tina Turner, or Carl Dean was to Dolly Parton, or Carlo Ponti was to Sophia Loren, or Maurice Templesman was to Jackie Onassis. I will be to you. Okay, you go out there and you become the most beloved woman in the world, and and I'll just wait for you at home, and I'll be loyal, and I'll never cheat on you. So.
Will you be like a house husband, Hartley? Like, will you
I'll be
cook
whatever
and things
Jennifer
like that?
wants me to be, or for that matter, any other beautiful women who are watching this.
That's right.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Yes.
Sure. What do you say to the notion that that they're are no more movie stars, or that's sort of going away too.
Well,
that idea that we have Tom Cruise, or we have
now he's doing Mission Impossible 90 or whatever. How many of those he's done?
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to remember Mission Impossible, the TV series. You know, and in fact, I remember even before Peter Graves was the star of that show, Stephen Hill was the top agent, and he would go into.
Was he the guy before?
Yeah, he was the guy before. He was only on for one season, but he was the guy before before Peter Graves joined the cast, and he'd walk into like the bathroom and close the door behind him, get into the into the toilet area, and he'd open up the manila folder and take out the little tape recorder and start playing it. Good morning, Mr. Briggs, and then he would take out the pictures. The guy on the tape would describe him what mission he had to perform, and who they had to assassinate or whatever it was. And this tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to blah blah blah. And as always, if you or any of your team is caught or killed, the secretary will deny that you ever existed. So, and then the tape would self-destruct. And so, anyway, I remember that was the original Mission Impossible TV series. But to answer your question, what's happened to film for the most part is what's happened to music, and what's happened to all the other creative arts. It's become taken over by the bean counters, taken over by the the people who are totally devoted to demographics. They figure, hey, if one Jurassic Park, no disrespect to Mr. Spielberg, but if one Jurassic Park becomes a hit, then we're going to have about 10,000 more and 10,000 more.
It's all about franchise.
It's all franchise. It's all. Although I will say this, I'm glad that the Addams Family became a franchise. I remember watching that original TV show back in the 60s. It was one of my all-time favorites. And, and then, of course, they had the movies, and now still going on to this day, the very beautiful young actress Jenna Ortega is playing Wednesday.
That's right.
And I can remember Lisa Loring was the original Wednesday on TV, and then Christina Ricci was Wednesday in the movies, and now that is a proud tradition that continues.
Yeah, I remember being a kid and seeing the movie in the 90s with Christina Ricci, and then probably my mom was watching the original Addams Family.
But the TV show was crazy wonderful. It was like these people who did exactly the opposite of what the rest of society was doing. And I remember one episode when Wednesday came home from school crying because the teacher had read her a fairy tale in which a dragon was killed at the end, and then Gomez was so upset. She was rooting for the dragon, obviously. And so Gomez was so upset. He went into the school board. He confronted the superintendent and said, "What kind of trash are you teaching our kids these days?"
Killing a dragon. Yeah, it was like for all the antisocial people.
Yes. Yeah, well, whatever the prevailing wisdom was, the Addams Family was totally opposed to it. It was very, very refreshing. Yes.
That's right. That's saying something. They were on it. They knew something that the rest of society didn't seem to know.
Yes.
Cool. Well.
Oh yeah, that was a cool series.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I guess we'll start to wrap up. But while I have you here, I got to ask you, Hartley Pleshaw. It's a pretty interesting name. I think you said it's only one. You're maybe the only one of that.
May well be the only person in the world with that name.
Because it's almost that newscaster name. Like they always have these great names.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went through a kind of hard time of it in my school days.
Oh, did you get a hard time?
Oh God,
because
yes.
of that?
Yeah, it was any kid with a weird name would have a hard time, and of course I had a hard time in any event. But thank you for liking my name.
Yeah. I don't know. You had no other insights in that. Just your parents came across it.
It's probably where it went wrong between my parents.
Was that the beginning of it?
Because Hartley was a family name from my mother's side of the family.
Okay.
And I don't know.
Is it typically a first name or
It's typically a last name.
Last name, I think of like Hal Hartley.
Most of the people, they'll call me Harvey or Harley.
Right.
And all I will say, back when I was a very young kid, my father was a big motorcycle guy. And he'd actually take me to like these motorcycle races and rallies.
Oh, cool.
And it was kind of cool back then.
I don't know. I mean, to me, it sounds cool.
This was like 1962. He took me up to the race up in Laconia, New Hampshire, during Bike Week, and there weren't too many people walking around.
Sounds like a Hunter S. Thompson.
There weren't too many people back in 1962 who had guys who had hair down to their ankles, but you could see a few back then. You could see they were like the pilot fish of the counterculture, the bikers, and of course everyone he met when he'd introduced me to them, these were all fellow biker enthusiasts. They thought my last name was Davidson,
Harley, yeah.
So, right. But I remember. So, sometimes that becomes a matter of some confusion.
Yeah. Well, we're here to set the record straight.
Yes.
Yeah. So who can we look forward to? Do you plan the radio show guests in
Actually,
advance,
right now I don't have any other guests lined up right now, but I hope to soon. I have some interesting people in mind, and I very much hope they'll join me. I mean, I'm on a kind of a streak right now. People like Jimmy Webb and Peter Asher, and one thing I both said to Peter and Jimmy when I met them in the meet and greet sessions after their shows. I reminded them to next time. They both worked very extensively with Linda Ronstadt, who was the goddess of my youth.
Yeah.
I mean, every heterosexual guy with legal eyesight in those days fell in love with Linda Ronstadt, and I was no exception. And they both worked very closely with her through the years, and I told them to give Linda my love next time they talk to her. And that brings us back to the beginning, because Linda, of course, is a native of Tucson, Arizona. And when I first met Carol Patton of Imagine Magazine, and she told me she came from Tucson. Of course, whenever I meet anyone from Tucson, the first question I ask them is, did you know Linda Ronstadt? And Carol told me, not only did she know Linda Ronstadt, they grew up together. They were best friends together, growing up first in Tucson and then attending the University of Arizona together. And my last chance, needless to say, I kept telling Carol, if you ever run into Linda again, please tell her I'm in love with her. Linda actually came to Boston a few years ago. This was after she unfortunately became ill. And I'll tell you, let me put it this way: I have a hard time believing in a merciful God when I think of what happened to Linda Ronstadt. But she was speaking at an AARP meeting, and it was down at the convention center in South Boston. And I got there late. I usually get to everything late. And there was a Q&A session that she was answering questions from the audience, and I got cold feet. I mean, how do you tell someone in front of a crowd of a couple of thousand people, how do you tell them that you've been in love with them for several decades? Finally, I got the courage to come up to the mic, and they had already had the last question, and they shut the meeting down. So what I would have told Linda was, and if you're watching this, Linda, please, I'd like to give her best regards from your old friend Carol Patton. Well, I'm so sorry that Carol is no longer with us, but we started this interview talking about Carol, and now
that's right.
Now,
how did you know how Carol knew Linda Ronstadt?
Well, I asked her. I said, you're from Tucson. Do you know Linda Ronstadt? And she told me they were old friends. They grew up together. So that was quite a story.
Prior to fame, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This was long before she was famous, and they went to school together in Tucson. Then they went to college together at the University of Arizona.
Okay.
And they eventually went their separate ways, but. She told me Linda was always beautiful, so I certainly believe that.
How did how did Carol make her way to Boston? Do you know that?
That's one question I never asked her.
Yeah.
Why a girl from Tucson would wind up in a town like Boston?
What's a girl like you doing in a town like this?
I'm so glad she did, because otherwise I wouldn't have met her and had that wonderful experience working for her and writing for Imagine magazine. So whatever drew her to Boston, I'm so glad it did, and I'm so glad we lost her.
Are there any other like articles that jump out to you from your time at Imagine magazine? Like you got to do a lot of press for them, right?
You know, there were probably the most memorable one for me was shortly before he passed on, I got to interview Leonard Nimoy.
Okay, wow.
Who was a Boston native, by the way. And we got to talking about, because I was an original Trekkie. I remember watching Star Trek back in the 60s when the first episodes, before it became a franchise. And he was a great guy to talk to. And I'm so sorry we lost him. But he's telling me all the behind-the-scenes stuff about Star Trek and how it came to be. And, you know, he was a wonderful man, not just a great actor, but a wonderful human being. And, you know, I always be grateful I got to talk to him.
So did you get to meet with him in person? Or
No, this was over the phone. He was in L.A. and I was in...
So it was like a junket kind of thing? Or
I wouldn't call it a junket. I mean, somehow Carol arranged for me to get his number.
Yeah, okay.
Because he was coming. He would just...
to Boston.
Well, he was coming to Boston. He did a TV show with his son, reminiscing about growing up in the old West End of Boston.
Okay, maybe that was for a GBH thing.
Yeah, that was on GBH, I believe. And, you know, Carol wanted to see if we could talk to Leonard about that event and about his Boston days. And thankfully, she picked me to do the interview. And that's something I'll always be grateful for, both getting the chance to interview Leonard and also actually talking to him, which was amazing. So,
yeah. And then you wrote it as a piece for
an article, yes.
For Imagine magazine.
Yes.
Yeah. And then he did a lot of interesting. What's his photography career? Seems interesting.
Well, he did a lot more than.
He seemed to be a fan of. Is it larger women or something?
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but in fact, he was after Star Trek went off. He was actually on the TV show Mission Impossible for a couple of years.
That was one of his other ones.
And of course, he did a lot of other work after that. And I asked him. I said, you know, do you get tired of constantly being identified as Mr. Spock? And he said, no, it was a great thing in my career. I'm glad it happened. He gave his blessing to what's the actor who played Spock in some of the sequels?
Zachary Quinto.
Quinto. Yeah, he said he gave his blessing to Zachary to carry on the character.
Well, it was pretty cool. I think in the J.J. Abrams movies over the past few years, like Leonard Nimoy actually made like some cameos in there, as opposed to William Shatner for some reason. Nimoy was in there a few times.
Oh yes,
it was like a parallel timeline or something. Like they had a storyline reason. For him being in there, so that was pretty cool. Yeah,
but he was a great guy, and I'm so sorry we lost him.
Yeah.
Although I got to say, William Shatner's still hanging in there. What is he, 100? And he's actually going up in space himself.
That's right.
Hey, more power to him.
Yeah. It's always fun to see who he gets into it with on Twitter or something. It seems to be a legendary curmudgeon, but he's earned I think 91. Or something.
Yeah,
I saw him on some podcast.
I remember the time he hosted Saturday Night Live, and they did a spoof of a Star Trek convention, and he came in and he said, "Don't you people have lives? Why do you live for this dumb TV show I did?"
It was just a TV show.
Yes.
Yeah. Well. TV's powerful.
Oh, yes, it certainly is.
It's what brought us together here today, Hartley.
It certainly did.
So, just for my trivia, what was the name? You said you did a access show, like a talk show. You were trying to interview somebody. What was the name?
Yeah, well, that was back in my Pepperell days.
The Pepperell one.
I called it Front Talk as opposed to Back Talk. That was the one. That was the one. That was the one I had Charles on, and I also got to interview, and I subsequently interviewed him on the radio. An amazing man, Robert Brustein, who was the dean of the Yale Drama School from like 1966 through 1980, and it was under his leadership at the Yale Drama School that some of his students were people like Meryl Streep and Sigourney Weaver and Wendy Wasserstein, and so many amazingly talented people came up under his guidance, and it was wonderful to talk to him. I mean, I had to restrain myself from just talking about Meryl Streep for an hour.
Right.
But yeah, apparently, yeah, he knew right away Meryl was going places. But he also told me about Sigourney, and the first time he met Sigourney at her first class at Yale Drama School, she spoke first. She said, "Whatever you do with me, however you cast me, don't want to be cast as a beautiful woman." And I said to Bob, I said, if you pulled that off, that was probably the greatest accomplishment of your career.
Yeah, right. Who was the one who you said you also knew, who I think taught Henry Winkler? Was that also?
Yes, he was also, Henry Winkler was also an Emersonian, by the way.
Yeah.
Was also mentored by Bob Brustein. And there he is, yes, a picture of him right there. Yeah, we talked about that and about, Henry had a pretty good career after Happy Days, but unlike Leonard Nimoy, who... it's a tough thing to say. What happens when you've played one of the most popular and beloved characters in television history?
Iconic that you can't.
What do you do with the rest of your career?
Right.
And I think Leonard had an easier time of it than Henry did, because I mean, Henry would forever be the Fonz, and Bob agreed with me that he sometimes typecasting can do a job on an actor's career, and it certainly did on Henry's career. But hey, Bob Brustein was just a fantastic human being. I would say two people who were really responsible for nurturing and creating the best of American pop culture from, I would say, the 60s to the 90s were Bob Brustein at Yale Drama School and Roger Corman at American International Pictures. Because think of all the great people Roger Corman mentored. I mean,
Jack Nicholson.
Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper, Francis Ford Coppola. All of those great people who created the so-called New Hollywood. He gave them their first start in the movie business, and he let them hone their craft. Granted, he did mainly schlock. I mean, right. It's exploitation films. But I said to Bob Brustein, I said, Roger Corman created the closest thing this country ever had to a National Film Academy, and at Yale Drama, you created the closest thing this country ever had to a National Theater Repertory Company. So those two guys should never be forgotten.
Yeah, like so many hits and so many stars came out of that.
Yes,
group of
I mean, if you were Meryl Streep's drama teacher, when Bob passed on, of course, that was the first line in his obituary. But hey, if he'd done nothing else with his life, that would be a great thing to have on your gravestone.
Yeah, and he had like several of those.
And he had so many others, actors, directors, right? Christopher Durang was another student of his, and great playwright, and of course Wendy Wasserstein, whom I loved. This guy was fantastic.
Henry Winkler, probably renowned as one of the nicer people, I think, in Hollywood. He did, because I got to do extra work on the movie Here Comes the Boom. We were at the old Quincy High School. I think that was like 2010 or something.
Right.
And he was having all the extras line up. We got to kind of chit chat with them. Usually they're not supposed to talk to the extras. And Winkler sort of had like a resurgence in the 90s in like the Adam Sandler movies and stuff, kind of. So he's sort of, also in the show Barry now, the HBO Max show. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, great actor, great guy. I've never heard anything bad about him. It's just that it's too bad that he was so Fonzified throughout his career. But great guy and another student of Bob Brustein's.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Hartley, you're an icon in your own right. Of course.
I like to think I am.
Yes. Master of the tongue.
Oh, someday, who knows? I might actually get paid to be on radio.
That's right. What do we say before we start? We're building up our catalog,
portfolio.
Our portfolio.
Yes.
So Hartley Pleshaw, what don't you do? Actor, radio host, writer, so many great things.
Yeah. Well, I've picked a lot of things to be mediocre at.
Right.
I'm most proud I've had such a eclectic life.
A tumbleweed of mediocrity eventually builds up to this large, mass of stuff that just knocks into the wall and breaks through.
I can. Thinking about that, I think about another idol of mine, the great satirist Stan Freberg, who was really kind of a precursor of the counterculture. And he did these fantastically funny commercials for TV commercials in the 60s. And one was for Sunsweet Prunes. And
it's our sponsor for today's episode.
Okay, yes, indeed. So is this guy directly staring into the camera, and you could, it was Stan Freberg's voice in the background, and he says, "Sir, try some Sunsweet Prunes," and and the man says, had a very grouchy and grim face. "I don't like prunes." "And why don't you like prunes, sir?" "The pits. I hate the pits." "And, well, try these Sunsweet Prunes. They don't have pits in them." And he takes one, he puts it in his mouth and chews it, and he said, "Very good. How do they do that?" And Stan Freberg says, "They do it." And said, "So, sir, now do you like prunes?" And he says, "No, I don't like the fact that they're wrinkled." And Stan Freberg's voice said, "Well, they're working on it." And finally the commercial ends. "Today, the pits. Tomorrow, the wrinkles. Sunsweet marches on." So that's kind of my attitude. Today, radio and television and theater. Tomorrow, something else. I will continue to march on.
That's right. Well, the March of Time was one of the one of the topics we had. I think you had record, but so I think that's a good attitude.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end it on. I think. Should we plug anything else? Are we?
I don't know. I think Sunsweet Prunes.
That's what you want to go out on.
Expecting some swag from those guys. Tomorrow, I expect a big box of prunes to be delivered at my apartment.
Are you totally selling out for the sponsors?
Well, if you're selling out.
What about Ritz crackers and the cheese?
Oh yeah. Hey, you guys. Hey, want to fill my cupboards with Ritz crackers and cheese? Please do. Yes.
Yeah. That sounds like what else can we ask for here?
I want my swag, folks.
That's right. Of course, Bob White from the Open Screen is always giving out his buttons with his logos and stuff. But we're gonna get some experimental Yule swag made soon. Some buttons, some stickers.
Yeah, everyone loves swag. Everyone loves the merch.
Free merch
has become more important than whoever is.
That's true.
Is the merch is for? I mean,
the actual content.
People, they want to get T-shirts of their of their favorite singers more than they want to see them.
Right. Yeah, we just want to. They just
want to take a piece of their favorite people home with them, their idols home with them.
Right.
Yes.
We just want to let people know, let them think we're at the show. We don't have to actually be there.
Right. like Taylor Swift, and what is it? Her bracelets. That's the big thing with her.
Is that what
her
it is?
fans? They all want the Taylor Swift bracelet. So we'll have to think about this. We'll have to think about our own merch.
Hartley Pleshaw
our own empire of merch.
That's right. We need to take an active. Occasionally, I can get artist D.L. Polonsky to make a poster here or there.
Right.
But it seems like it's like pulling teeth sometimes to get help with the merch. Lawrence Holly is always saying, like, the experimental T-shirts. It's not happened yet. I think it's my goal. We've got a rudimentary logo is drawn up, and we will be having some merch, I think.
Yes. Well, of course, then when we start to make movies, and we'll have to, make a lot of money from the product placement. I'm thinking to myself, there was a Cold War movie made back in the 50s on the beach about the end of the world resulting from nuclear war.
Okay, yeah.
And part one.
Lawrence Hartley loves stuff like that.
Well, what happens is a scene where Gregory Peck is the submarine captain, and they go up to San Francisco to see if there's anyone still alive, and one of the sailors jumps ship, and he's from San Francisco, and he wants to die there, and finally, they find him, and from under the submarine, the periscope comes up, and Gregory Peck asks the sailor, "Are you sick yet? From all the radiation that's killed everyone else."
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, I felt kind of sick when I jumped ship, but I went to the drugstore and I got some Alka-Seltzer, and I feel better now." And I'm thinking to myself, Stanley Kramer was the director of the film, or the producer and director. I said, why didn't he make a product placement deal with Alka-Seltzer, which not only, settles your upset stomach, but protects you from radiation poisoning? Why didn't he make that? He would have made an incredible killing with product placement if he had made that deal.
That was the one that can cure.
Protect you from, let you survive a nuclear war, and also, calm your upset stomach. And I'm thinking to myself, now that's what when we really start, you and me and Lawrence start making these big films, we got to keep that in mind. Product placement. That's where the money is,
right,
folks.
Well, I already thought about approaching like a local pizzeria or something where you could stick in an ad somewhere in the. No, that'd be nice, but I'm thinking to myself, let's make a deal with someone like Jeff Bezos or right.
Someone, the richest people in the world, Bill Gates. Bill Gates just announced he wants to give away all his money before he dies. I said, "Hey, Bill, I'm here. I'll be happy to relieve you of your guilt."
Experimentally, the movie 11 isn't just going to happen. I mean, we need the funds.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So all you greedy capitalist consumerists out there. Yeah, talk to us about merch. Talk to us about product placement. Talk to us about swag. Our ears are open.
How about some celebrity endorsements? Who could we get, Hartley? Because I know you've met a few celebrities, notably on your Facebook for a while. Snooki was popular.
Yes, yeah. Well, she's
from the Jersey Shore.
Yes. Well, it was a memorable day. Mike Morgan actually set that up.
Okay.
What happened was, this was in the heyday of Jersey Shore, and she came to this crowded little disco in Fitchburg, Massachusetts.
Okay, that's a random.
Yeah, well, Fitchburg is what it is. Anyway, lovely town, but not exactly teeming metropolis. Mm-hmm. And so he said, "Hey, I'm going to go down there tonight, and Snooki's going to be there. You want to join me?" I said, "Sure." And I was not a big. I didn't watch Jersey Shore every week, but hey, how many times do you get to meet a big celebrity like Snooki? And so I got my picture taken with her, and she's very beautiful. But the funny thing about Snooki is she subsequently, of course, she was considered a real wild personality. I mean, most of Jersey Shore consisted of her getting drunk or fighting with someone.
Right.
But now she met the man of her dreams. I'm sorry to say it wasn't me. And she settled down, and she's a very conscientious mother and wife and domestic house person. And so God bless Snooki. I'm just sorry you didn't run away with me.
So you have anybody else jump to mind that you've out of the litany of women that you've
I one of the things, I'm getting a little serious here, so forgive me.
Should we end on a serious note?
I met Raquel Welch once.
Oh wow.
And she was I think it was at a store at the Chestnut Hill Mall, and she was promoting a perfume or something like that. And of course I've long admired Ms. Welch. And I actually got a chance to get up and meet her and say hello. And I, she autographed some photographs I had of her. She's very nice. But, I thought I would, on that occasion, I'd kind of play it cool. I wouldn't tell her that I was insanely in love with her. And after I had I handed her an envelope. And inside the envelope, I said, Ms. Welch, at your leisure, could you open this and read it and so forth? Actually, I'd written her a marriage proposal. And I never really heard from her. I guess she got the thing lost somewhere. She never did get back to me about marrying me. But I always regret that I wasn't more, shall we say, expressive on that occasion to tell her how incredibly in love I was with her. I also got to see her live one other time. She was performing in a play in Foxborough, Massachusetts. She was performing the George Bernard Shaw play, The Millionaires. And of course, there was no meet and greet or anything like that after the show. But then after the performance, I'd never been in this theater before, so I was looking for the men's room, and I wandered around, and there in the hallway was Raquel Welch. And I said to myself, oh my God, this is it. This is going to be something you'll remember your whole life. Why don't I walk up to her and tell her, mention that I was the guy who gave her that letter asking her to marry me, but I got cold feet. And she walked away and I walked away, and I figured, well, someday I'll meet her again and tell her how much I love her. Well, then one day I found out that she'd passed away. And I always regret that. Of course, maybe if I had approached her that time in Foxborough, about a dozen security goons would have jumped on me and rearranged several of my bodily organs.
Oh no!
But I always regret that I wasn't more affectionate toward Raquel when I had those two great opportunities to be so. So she was. Well, what can I say? She was one of the most beautiful women who ever lived. So that was kind of a misadventure on my part. I just didn't have the gumption to really connect with her, and I always regret that.
But writing the letter is actually a good move, because
I don't know if she ever actually read that letter.
Yeah,
maybe
but
she
you
did.
tried.
Maybe she did and figured I was really a crank. And I'm sure she's got a lot of crank marriage proposals through the years.
Which marriage proposal?
Yeah. But anyway, she will always have a special place in my heart.
That's great. Well, what else should we go out on that, or what else should we?
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard to top Raquel Welch, isn't it?
Yes. That's true, man.
So, Michael, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Hartley Pleshaw.
To bare my soul.
Yes. Well, we forever continue to look for that spark of either creativity or finding that lost love, or whatever really sparks
whatever I can do and to work with people like you and Lawrence is wonderful, and I look forward to continuing to do so.
Sure, yeah.
And then
we'll
getting
keep on
my hands on all that merch money, and
right.
that swag money. And
how are we going to cut up the merch?
Yeah, well, we'll worry about that later. It'll be like the Beatles when they, when they were all multimillionaires and they finally broke up and fell out as over business. Yes, look.
It's just a business at that point.
Yeah, well, I'll worry about that with you and Lawrence when the time comes. When we've got $1 trillion to worry about distributing.
Until then, we're in it for the art. So
yes, we're in it for the art.
Yes,
as Ernie Kovacs once said, he had a TV show. He was a very creative guy, and he turned to the camera during one show and he said, "I'm doing this for the art. The money means nothing." Of course, the money is nothing. That's why it means nothing.
Right. It reminds me of our stuff. So
yes.
Until then, we continue to add to our catalog some prestigious content. Where else can you get this much Hartley Pleshaw? And if you want more Hartley Pleshaw, I think during Well, there's the show on the weekend, Active Radio.
Yes, Active Radio from 10:05 a.m. to 11 a.m. on WCAP AM 980 Lowell. Available online all over the world at www.980wcap.com. Go to the website, click on Listen Live, and you've got me on Saturdays. And then during the week, Mondays through Thursdays, same station, WCAP AM 980 Lowell, and same website, www.980wcap.com. I'm on afternoons with none other than Hartley Pleshaw from, I'd say about 3:10. We do a news, weather, traffic, and commercials first, but from 3:10 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. So join me.
Yes. All right. We can also, of course, see Hartley Pleshaw's segment in currently the 10 Experimentally Ill, the movie series. And you can check that out on youtube.com/experimentally ill. Also, hey, man, come out to the Boston Open Screen at the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, Mass. And last one of the season is going to be June 17th, 2025, if you're hearing this. After that, it usually resumes in somewhere in October, but Open Screen LA at the Lyric Hyperion in Silver Lake, California is going to continue through the summer, and I know co-producer Lawrence Hawley is going to be bringing our work out to there, and I hear we're kind of becoming a thing over there. They made some kind of reference to me or to my name in some other movie during the Open Screen in LA, so I'm told I'm becoming a character over there. So are we famous or are we infamous? Hartley?
These days, does it really matter?
Doesn't really matter, right?
I mean, look, as soon as they got out of jail, the Menendez brothers are probably going to get their own sitcom.
Oh, right.
So,
docu-series.
That doesn't mean anything.
Dark Side of the Ring.
Yes.
Or something. Yeah. So check it out, man. Experimentallyill.com for more. I am Michael Phelan O'Toole. Check us out. This is the Experimentally Ill Podcast, episode 119. This was May 18th, 2025. And, yeah, man, we had Hartley Pleshaw. And Lawrence loves this part of it, of course, where I sign off with, what do we say? Where there is an ill, there is a way. So, be part of the experiment right here on Experimentally Ill.
I think he's lost his mind. He's never been like this before. Tonight he was almost raving.
What did he say?
Oh, crazy things. That he's some kind of a spaceman and that they're taking over the Earth and that we're all going to die.
Don't listen to them. They told me to keep in mind the scientific and